What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty, and welcome to another amazing video. You can follow me on Patreon for exclusive stories. Pirate Invincible from the start 1 Pi Chapter 1 in front of me, distance? What is that? East Blue. Seymour GG Village, Yixin Dojo, hey. Hey. In the sword hall in the middle of the dojo, a group of children lined up in 2 rows, holding bamboo swords, waving vigorously at the air. The friction between the bamboo sword and the air made a whooping sound. There is a huge sakura flower tree in the backyard of the sword hall. On the lawn under the tree, lay a little boy about 11 years old with silver hair. A book is covering his face, the journal of an unknown navigator. A gust of spring breeze blows, and the fluttering sakura flower petals glisten with the unevaporated dew in the morning sun. A sudden shout broke this beautiful picture. Sorata, why are you being lazy again? I saw a little girl about 10 years old walking out of the corridor leading to the backyard of the sword hall. She was wearing a white t-shirt, shorts with big trousers, a bamboo sword in her hand, and short dark blue hair, like waves on the sea, swaying back and forth with the air current. The girl walked up to Sorata and looked at him quietly with a smile in her eyes. When seeing Sorata without any movement for a long time, immediately, she stared at her big eyes like bright mirrors, puffed up her childish cheeks with a bit of baby fat. Groaned loudly. Really, Sorata, it's time to train. This expression is just like a goldfish, hear the cry. Sorata stretched out his hands lazily around his head, paused for a moment, and then hesitantly picked up the book that was covered in front of his eyes to block the sun. The cute and delicate face underneath was revealed. Although the morning sun in early spring is very warm, it is still quite dazzling, which prevents Sorata from opening his eyes. He opened his mouth wide, yawned, eyes slit, looked at Kuina and said softly. It's Kuina. The weather is so nice, let me sleep a little longer. Okay, just a moment. As he spoke, he closed his eyes again. The sun was so warm that he turned over involuntarily. Seeing Sorata's salty fish appearance, Kuina rolled her eyes helplessly. She pouted, squatted down, and shook his hand for a while. Sorata. Get up. Why are you so lazy during this period of time? You used to train with all your might. Sorata didn't even open her eyes, and lazily said, I don't know, maybe it's the menstrual period, anyway, I just don't want to move. Sorata. Kuina shook off Sorata's hand forcefully, clenched her fist, and hammered him lightly a few times. You can't speak human words. I encountered a bottleneck during this time, and it was useless to work hard, so I went to ask the master. What did father say? Kuina looked curious. He said that if you realize it, you will naturally make a breakthrough. Sorata frowned slightly. It's just like nonsense. Is it so easy to understand? I've been thinking recently, how can I break through the bottleneck? So, you will be able to reach the Sword Hero realm soon? Kuina looked at Sorata, smiling all over her face. It's really amazing. Advertisement. Then she seemed to think of something, and her face gradually turned from joy to worry. Hey. Sorata, when will I become a swordsman? My father always said that female swordsmen have flaws and will never be the strongest. As she spoke, she grasped Sorata's arm with both hands, and gradually tightened it. With a flash of unwillingness in her eyes, she said loudly. I understand what a flaw is, but I'm not reconciled. Sensing Kuina's emotion, Sorata turned around, lay flat, and opened her eyes. His pupils are azure blue with silver mist, and there are nebulae floating around, like the starry sky in the dark night, deep and full of mystery. People can't help but be intoxicated after watching it. His already handsome facial features, coupled with these ultimate beautiful eyes, instantly became extremely handsome. Sorata looked at Kuina with pity in his eyes. He stretched out his right hand and smoothed her brows, then covered her head with his big warm hand and rubbed it. Then the voice said firmly and forcefully, of course, Kuina will definitely become the strongest female swordsman in the world in the future. He met Kuina's eyes, and the nebula flowed in his eyes, as if he wanted to transmit a force called uplifting into Kuina's heart. Promise me, Kuina. What? Don't hesitate, don't be sad, you just need to be firm and move forward, with me. You will definitely become a swordsman, even if it is the strongest in the world. You must, too. Looking at Sorata's deep eyes, the corners of Kuina's mouth slowly turned up, showing a smile again. She slowly lay down and rested her head on Sorata's chest, listening to his slow and powerful heartbeat. She gradually let go of the daze in her heart. Sorata, it's good to have you. Then he spoke firmly and forcefully. I promise you. Sorata looked up at the sun in the sky, her eyes half open, revealing memories. It's been almost 5 years since he traveled to this world, and he still hasn't figured out how he got here. He was originally an ordinary programmer working dog on Earth, named Li Shaokong, who grew up in an orphanage, withdrawn and introverted, with few friends. Since I was obsessed with the second dimension in college, I was fortunate to become a happy fat house. At the age of 30, I have a car and a house, but I don't have hair or a wife. I thought that I would start working hard to find a girlfriend, but I didn't know that when I woke up, I was floating on the sea. His Simmons bed is gone. His 120 square meter, 3-bedroom, 1 living large flat floor is gone. His desire to find a girlfriend just now is gone. Even his body has turned into a kid around 5 years old. God knows what he was feeling at the time. All I know is that he still has lingering fears. I don't know which god tier took pity on him, When he was allowed to travel through time, his body was upgraded. His body seemed to be in a different time and space all the time, and the surface was covered with countless layers of space, so that the seawater below him could not reach him. In this way, he drifted on the sea for 2 whole days. Fortunately, during this period, no marine beasts that attack people were encountered. Just when he was so hungry that he was about to pass out, he was found and rescued by Koshiro, who was out to sea. When he first arrived at Yiksen Dojo, due to the language barrier, he once thought that he had traveled to ancient Japan. Because everyone around is speaking Japanese. For the 2-dimensional otaku, he still knows a little about Japanese. For example, buy discs, store by store, and so on. In the 1 year or so since he came to this world, he gradually learned the language of this world, and finally figured out where he came to. Unexpectedly, he actually traveled to the world of One Piece. No wonder, he always felt that Koshiro had seen it somewhere. As for the cheat and the upgraded ability of the body, this thing is a bit strange. His body is unconsciously emitting layer after layer of space, and these spaces will basically not dissipate. Until now, he himself didn't know how many layers of space there were on the surface of his body. Anyway, infinitely many. These spaces are not spaces in the general sense, but spaces that can be stretched infinitely. The closer to him, the more layers of space, and the farther the distance is relatively speaking. It looks as if he is right in front of your eyes, but it is actually Tianya who is very close. Advertisement. This is also the reason why he did not sink into the sea just after crossing over. At that time, he thought it was a bubble, and he was so scared that he didn't dare to move when he was floating in the sea. This kind of physique, because of its space attribute, he also named it spatial physique. When he first arrived at Yiksen Dojo, because he couldn't control his abilities freely, no one could touch his body. This time, he was in the sword hall and attracted everyone's attention. Made him look like a giant panda. In the next few years, he gradually controlled the ability of a part of his body, allowing him to gradually close the space on the surface of his body, so that others could touch him, so that he would not be so lonely. It can be put away, and of course it can also be placed outside. As the space expands outward, it can be transformed into a space similar to a domain. With the increase in the number of layers released, the greater the control, the more physical and mental effort. In theory, in his space domain, as long as he wants, he can freeze everything. Of course, this also depends on the strength of the target. Compared with freezing an ant, the power used to freeze an elephant must be different. Due to the spatialization of his physique, he can easily see and perceive the surrounding space nodes, so that he can step on these space nodes for teleportation, and this teleportation is as easy as walking. Because his spirit can only perceive the nodes in the space field, but not outside. So in the early stage, he could only use his eyes to find space nodes, so as to teleport. But after his observation haki awakened, the situation changed completely. I don't know if it's because of the upgraded body, which leads to the strengthening of the spirit, or because of his 5-year-old body and 30-year-old soul. Let him awaken naturally within less than a year after he came to this world, observation haki. Since the awakening of knowledge and knowledge, he found that his spirit can actually be attached to observation haki, thus rushing out of his space domain, allowing him to perceive space nodes outside the space domain. This makes his teleportation more convenient, faster, and has a wider range. After all, the sight distance of the eyes is limited, and it is impossible to teleport at will. As for knowledge, color and spirit, there are not so many restrictions. With his spatial physique, in the world of One Piece, he believes that as long as he knows, no one can hurt him. Of course, this is just defense. If his attack is not good, he can only watch the enemy helplessly, and there is no way to protect the people around him. After all, his teleportation cannot take people, and these are all known abilities. The ghost knows that in the sea, any unknown ability can hurt him, or even kill him. So even though he has invincible abilities, he actually doesn't have much sense of security. Only by training hard and increasing the strength of the body can we increase our self-confidence. Because in this world with many miraculous powers, there is another kind of power that everyone has, which can make people step to the top. That is the power of haki. With the aptitude of his upgraded body, he believes that he can easily awaken armament haki in a short time. Because he found that his body is automatically getting stronger all the time, as if it is endless. And as he grows older, this change is still increasing. He was deeply fascinated by this feeling of opening up and infinitely improving his strength. It also made him believe that he would be able to stand on top of the world. So as to truly do it without being afraid of anyone or anything. Kuina. At this time, Koshiro's voice came from the sword hall. Coming. Kuina quickly raised her head from Sorata's heart, and replied to the sword hall. Then she quickly stood up and walked towards the sword hall. Sorata regained consciousness. Turning to look at Kuina's back, listening to the noise in the gymnasium, and the naive, unique and particularly arrogant challenge. There was a weird smile on his face. He stood up slowly, patted the petals and fallen leaves on his body, bent down and picked up the bamboo sword and books leaning against the tree. Turn around and insert the bamboo sword into the sword stand next to it, and put the book away. Then he put his hands on his head and walked towards the sword hall. Here comes the interesting guy. Chapter 2: The Cute Green-Haired Kid. Yiksen Dojo, in the sword hall. It was silent. Under the walls all around, there are apprentices from the gymnasium. The apprentices all held their breath and looked at the center of the sword hall with strange expressions. On the opposite side of Kuina, there was a green-haired, arrogant little devil, not only holding 2 bundles of bamboo swords in his hands, but also biting several bamboo swords in his mouth. This guy doesn't really think that the more swords you have, the more powerful you are. Among the crowd of apprentices, Sorata sat on the ground, lazily leaning her back against the wall. He looked at Zoro quietly, with a big smile on his face. Is this Zoro? He was really cute when he was a child, and it must be fun to bully him in the future. Thinking of this, Sorata couldn't help laughing out loud. Ha 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 ha. The people around looked at Sorata, who burst out laughing inexplicably, with question marks on their faces. This green-haired kid, although it's funny, don't be so exaggerated. How did they know that Sorata was thinking about the future? Zoro heard the laughter and turned to stare at Sorata, frowning. His intuition told him that the guy must be laughing at him. Hey, that silver-haired brat over there. Sorata looked around, pointed at himself, and asked Zoro doubtfully, are you calling me? Yes, it's you. Don't look around. What are you laughing at? Do you want to fight? Sorata waved her hands again and again. Go ahead, I just remembered something happy. Then he covered his mouth and shook his shoulders. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that he was holding back a smile. Zoro stared at Sorata, a gleam of anger in his eyes. This silver hair must be laughing at him. When this woman is dealt with, we must let him know how powerful I am. Koshiro cast a helpless glance at Sorata, reached out to support the frame of the mirror, and said to Kuina and Zoro. Then, get ready to start and salute to the altar. Both Kuina and Zoro turned around, faced the altar, bowed and saluted. Turning around, Kuina glanced at Zoro contemptuously, held the hilt of the sword with her right hand, flicked it up, and rushed towards Zoro quickly. In her opinion, Zoro is still too immature, and it may not even be possible for her to receive a sword. Due to the high speed, in the blink of an eye, Kuina had already arrived in front of Zoro. Feeling the sharp edge above his head, Zoro didn't even have time to take half a step back. He could only cross his hands and raise his sword above his head, hoping to prevent the sword. Snapped, as soon as he blocked this sword, another sword came, and this time it was stronger, and he was sent flying in one blow, and the bamboo sword scattered all over the ground. Hateful. He got up quickly and stood up, picked up 2 bamboo swords nearby, and turned sideways, one hand forward and the other behind, in a posture of holding the sword with 2 swords. Seeing Zoro's posture, Kuina had a weird look on his face. Have you ever learned the 2-sword swordsmanship? That's not true. Today is the first time I hold a bamboo sword. Zoro stared, opened his mouth and roared loudly. Damn it, I'm very strong, and I will be even stronger in the future. How can I lose to a woman like you? Then he charged at Kuina, sword in both hands, roaring. What? Kuina looked at Zoro, who looked like a beast, held the sword in both hands, raised it up, took a step forward, and quickly slashed down with the sword. Step forward and chop. It was so fast that Zoro couldn't react at all, and the sword slashed on his forehead. Snapped, the crisp sound of the bamboo sword can be heard outside the sword hall. Zoro rolled his eyes, froze in place, and then fell to the floor with a bang. The apprentices watching the battle around the sword hall looked at Zoro, who fell to the ground, and all took a breath. Hiss. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Beside Sorata, an apprentice with a crew cut shrunk his neck back, the corners of his mouth twitched wildly, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. It seemed that he had also experienced the same experience. Why doesn't he hide? Beside the crew cut, a brat with a sausage mouth frowned and said doubtfully. Kuina's sword. How could this brat avoid it? On the other side of Sorata, a fat man wearing glasses pushed the frame of the glasses with trembling hands, pretending to be calm Kaido. Okay, the sausage mouth kid kept nodding. Advertisement. In the gym, except for Sorata and Master, no one can escape Kuina's sword, let alone this green-haired brat. Sorata looked at the 3 guys with a smile on his lips. These 3 little ghosts are the people he is most familiar with in Yixin Dojo, except for Koshiro and Kuina. The one with the crew cut is called a Luo, the one with the sausage mouth is called a Dao, and the fat man with glasses is called a Wa. All 3 of these guys were beaten up by Kuina growing up. That's why I feel so empathetic when I see Zoro. Now that Zoro is here, they will never have to compete with Kuina again. At this moment, the brother who was standing beside the referee shouted loudly, 1 point, stop here. Kuina looked at Zoro on the ground, and said indifferently, this kid is like a wild beast, he only knows how to be reckless. Hi, Kuina. Koshiro looked at his daughter rather helplessly. You are obviously a layman, and if you want to play 2 swords, you are 10 years too early. Kuina is full of disdain for Zoro's swordsmanship. Without a sound, Sorata suddenly teleported to Kuina's side, and he reached out and patted Kuina's head. Okay, Kuina. It appeared, Sorata's teleportation. Yeah, every time I see it, I feel so handsome. Seeing Sorata, who was still by his side just now, suddenly appearing beside Kuina on the opposite side, Awa jumped up excitedly, and then ran to the middle of the sword hall, and other people watched and slowly surrounded him. When Kuina saw Sorata, a smile appeared on her indifferent face. During the 5 years of being together day and night, she has been very dependent on Sorata. Although she is only 1 year older than her, she behaves extraordinarily mature, just like an adult, a big brother, and an object of admiration and pursuit. She took Sorata's hand and said, Sorata, this kid doesn't understand anything. He only knows how to do it. Sorata looked at Kuina with a weird smile. In the future, you will know how difficult this guy is, and you will have a headache at that time. He then turned his head to look at Zoro, squatted down, stretched out his right hand, and tapped his middle and index fingers on Zoro's forehead, and said in a slightly middle voice, "Young man, work hard, and chase after Kuina from now on." After speaking, he stood up and smiled at Koshiro beside him. "Master, this junior is very qualified." "Damn it, don't talk to yourself, I will definitely defeat you." Zoro woke up when Sorata appeared, but when the guy put a finger on his forehead, he couldn't move at all for some reason. It wasn't until Sorata's fingers left that he could control his body and yelled, "Damn it, you wait for my uncle." Kuina poked her head out from behind Sorata and looked at Zoro and said indifferently, "Why, since this is the case, do you want to compete again?" Zoro pulled himself together and stood up tremblingly. He first patted the dust on his body, and then said loudly to Kaido, "If you lose, you lose." He is not someone who can afford to lose. Koshiro stared at Zoro with a smile and asked, "It's simple, not bad, so." "Ha, I will join your sect, do you have any opinions?" "No." Listening to Zoro's answer, Koshiro squinted his eyes with a satisfied smile on his face. Zoro turned his head and opened his eyes wide, and said firmly to Kuina, "I will work hard, practice hard, and then I will beat you." Then his gaze turned to Sorata. "And you wait for my uncle. I will deal with you after I win this woman, remember it." Is this guy an idiot? He can't even beat Kuina, yet he dares to speak wildly and challenge Sorata. Alo looked at Zoro and said in surprise. Koshiro looked at Zoro with a smile in his eyes, ambitious. Seeing Zoro's cute look, Sorata couldn't help pinching his face. "Wow, do you want to surpass me? Then you have to work hard in the future, or you may have to work hard to surpass me. It might last a lifetime." Sorata said it was terrible, but there was a wicked smile on his face. "What's your name?" Although he already knew Zoro's name, he couldn't help but want to tease him. "Damn it. Don't treat my uncle like a child, and move his hands and feet at every turn." Zoro opened Sorata's hand, stared at Sorata stubbornly and shouted loudly, "Remember, my name is Roronoa Zoro. Well, I'll call you Xiaolong from now on, damn it, I told you not to treat me like a child." Zoro roared frantically. If it weren't for the fact that his physical strength hadn't recovered yet, he would have rushed over to strike Sorata's cheeky smile with such a sword. Don't think that because he is handsome, he will not dare to fight. "Sorata, let's go to practice, today has been delayed for a long time." At this time, Kuina's indifferent voice came from behind. Advertisement. Sorata turned around and looked at Kuina, who was about to explode, and shrugged helplessly. Kuina is good at everything, but she is too dependent on him. Seeing that he paid so much attention to Zoro, he was actually jealous. He had no choice but to walk to the backyard with his hands behind his head. Okay, our little Kuina knows how to be jealous." Kuina hurriedly followed, looked sideways at him, and said with a reddish face, "Who is jealous? I just don't think it should be such a waste of time." Walking to the door, Sorata stopped and turned to look at Zoro. "Hey, Zoro." Hearing Sorata's shout, Zoro looked up at him suspiciously and asked, "What's wrong?" "If you want to become stronger quickly, follow up." After speaking, Sorata turned and walked out the back door. Thinking about being able to bully in the future. It's training Zoro, and he's comfortable." Kuina turned her head and gave Zoro a disgusted look, and then hurriedly followed Sorata. At this time, the friends in the sword gym were all in a quarrel, and they stared at Zoro with surprise on their faces, as if they wanted to see a flower in him. Adao looked at Zoro and sighed. "You are so lucky, you can train with Sorata." Sensing the gazes around him, Zoro's face was full of doubts. Is silver hair so powerful? Of course, Sorata was able to defeat everyone except the master within a few days of coming to the sword hall. And Sorata's weird ability, when Sorata first came, we couldn't even touch him. And Kuina, after training with Sorata for about a year, can defeat the adults in the sword gym. Yeah, it's been almost 4 years now, I don't know how good Sorata and Kuina are now. The apprentices looked at Zoro with envious expressions on their faces. After so long, only Kuina can train with Sorata in the sword gym. How can this green-haired kid who just arrived? Of course they knew that their aptitude was not enough. Could this green-haired kid be able to do it? Okay, what are you all doing here? Hurry up and go to training. Then Koshiro came over. He stared at these apprentices with a smile and said loudly, "It's not that Sorata doesn't take you. It's because his training methods also require qualifications. If your qualifications are not up to standard, it's useless to go." "Yes, master." After listening to Koshiro's words, they walked back one by one and picked up the bamboo swords to practice. Are those two guys so strong? I have to work hard to become stronger. Zoro looked at Koshiro, eyes full of fighting spirit. He shouted arrogantly at Koshiro, "Hey, uncle, since you joined your sect, do you have any tricks to teach me?" Koshiro heard Zoro's appellation, the corners of his mouth twitched, another brat, then he raised his hand and knocked on Zoro's head. "I'm going to call master in the future, did you hear me?" Hiss. "It hurts." Zoro quickly squatted on the ground, covering his head with his hands. The sword wound just now still hurts. He looked up and saw Koshiro's hand about to raise again, and hurriedly said loudly, "Yes, master." Koshiro withdrew his hand in satisfaction, looked down at Zoro and said, "I will only teach you kendo knowledge." As for training, it depends on yourself. In addition to learning kendo knowledge from me, you can train with Sorata for the rest of the time. Don't look at him. At the age of 11, he is already very powerful. Is it really that powerful? Zoro looked at Koshiro and muttered. Very powerful. Remembrance flashed in Koshiro's eyes. He is a real monster. I don't know if Sorata's ability is devil fruit. It's strange to say that his ability is devil fruit, but he is not afraid of seawater. And his physical fitness, the progress in the past few years is too fast. I don't know where I can go in the future. He looked down at Zoro. This is also a monster. With such fighting spirit and physical fitness, it's hard not to be strong, not to mention Sorata. Koshiro squinted, the smile on his face never stopping. Well, these two monsters are his apprentices. He shook his head slightly and said to Zoro. Go find Sorata. As he spoke, he glanced at Zoro meaningfully. After listening to Koshiro's words, Zoro paused for a moment, then ran to the backyard full of fighting spirit. Let me take a good look at whether your training method can really make me stronger quickly. If not, I will kill you. Chapter 3 Thoroughly integrate into this world. Walking through the courtyard, the first thing Zoro saw was a huge sakura flower tree. After passing the sakura flower tree, the back door is behind. There was a row of black barbell plates in the open space outside the back door, and the barbell plates were lined up from big to small. The smallest one was as big as a basin, while the largest one was 3 or 4 as tall as him. Passing through the iron mountain in front of him, Kuina was waving an iron rod with sweat profusely. At the front end of the iron rod was hung a barbell plate about his height. Hey, the weight of the barbell can be felt from her veined arm. Looking inside, you can see Sorata is topless, with her hands on the ground, doing push-ups on her head. And above his feet, there is a barbell with barbell plates on both sides. Hey, that's how you train, it's nothing special. Watching the training of the two of Sorata, Zoro walked forward confidently. What, that's it, isn't this normal training? If he can become stronger this way, he will definitely be able to defeat Kuina in no time. But when he approached about 5 meters away from Sorata, he suddenly seemed to have fallen into the deep sea, and there was endless pressure in all directions. Especially on the back, it seemed that there was a heavy burden all of a sudden, and he was trying to press him down bit by bit. With this little pressure, how can it be possible to stump him? He roared furiously in his heart, his eyes widened, and a streak of blood appeared in his eyeballs. He stared up at Kuina closely, clenched his teeth, his legs trembling, and slowly moved forward step by step. It took him about 10 minutes to cover the few meters. Kuina glanced at Zoro indifferently and continued to practice swinging the sword. Sorata had said to her, in this world, although women's physique is not as good as that of men, the key to victory does not necessarily depend on strength. Sometimes skills and speed are also the key to victory. You just need to kill the enemy before your physical strength is exhausted. It's victory. Thinking of this, she couldn't help speeding up the movement of swinging the sword a little. Zoro was deeply stimulated by Kuina's glance. He raised his head and stared at Kuina with fighting spirit. I must surpass her. Although I don't know what's going on here, but if I can train in this environment, I should be able to become stronger soon. Relaxing, taking a deep breath, he slowly squatted down and did push-ups with his hands on the ground. Since it is difficult to stand up, it is also necessary to practice lying down. Sorata looked at Zoro, who had a hideous face due to excessive force, and could only say that this amazing willpower is worthy of Zoro. If ordinary people entered his spatial domain, let alone training, I'm afraid they would have no hope of even lying on their stomachs, they could only lie flat. This space is his space domain, and he can now control the domain to extend a radius of 5 meters. Advertisement within this space range, the more layers that extend outward, the stronger the control. It can compress the space to achieve pressurization, and of course it can also depressurize to fly. 9,999, 10,000. Sorata silently read the numbers in her heart and stopped. Boom, he bent his feet slightly, pushed up, and threw the barbell aside, splashing dust all over the floor. Then he used his hands hard, jumped upside down, and landed firmly next to the barbell next to him. Looking at Zoro, who was already fainted from exhaustion, he picked up the sweat towel on the barbell plate, wiped the sweat from his face, and put away the field. Kuina, who was resting next to her with her eyes closed, suddenly felt light all over, knowing that Sorata had finished training. She quickly picked up the bamboo swords on her legs, stood up, and spoke to Sorata. Sorata, let's start today's duel. Wait, wake up Zoro first. Zoro's breathing gradually calmed down as the field dissipated. But judging by his appearance, he may not be able to wake up for the time being, so Sorata has to help. Sorata hung the sweat towel around his neck casually, walked up to Zoro, bent down and grabbed the clothes at the nape of his neck, and lifted them up like a sleepy green-haired cat. Then he turned around and walked towards the creek not far away. Kuina looked at the direction Sorata was going, and already knew what he was going to do. She trotted to keep up. Sorata, he will definitely challenge you later. No, I'll tell him you did it. Sorata turned to look at Kuina and joked deliberately. It doesn't matter anyway, he can't beat me. Kuina looked at the confidence on Zoro's face. Of course, she also has reasons for her self-confidence. In the entire Seymour GG village, her swordsmanship has been recognized by everyone except her father. You can't underestimate Zoro, his willpower and determination will never lose to you. After getting along today, I can certainly feel his determination and see his willpower like a beast. Kuina stared at Sorata and said firmly, but I promised you that I am determined to become the strongest female swordsman in the world. Only in this way can I always be by your side. After hearing Kuina's words, Sorata couldn't help being taken aback. For so many years, it has been Master Koshiro and Kuina who have taken care of him like family members, and gradually erased his confusion, hesitation, and fear. This kind of trust and bond is so clear at this moment. Advertisement, yeah. This is not the anime world, this is a living world with flesh and blood, ideals, and dreams. In the past, he had been trying to integrate into this world, but after all, he felt a little bit worse. Now he knows, the difference is the bondage. Only in this world is there a bond, a home, and a spiritual belonging. Only then can he fully integrate into this world, otherwise he will always be a lonely ghost. At this moment, he clearly felt that there was a kind of power gushing from the bottom of his heart, breaking through the realm that he had always wanted to enter but could not enter. He closed his eyes gently, and his spirit radiated outwards. At this moment, he could feel that the whole world seemed to come alive. Creeks, woods, birdsong, ocean, clouds, sunshine, everything is so vivid. Is this the Sword Hero realm? Ha 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 ha. This kind of epiphany made him laugh out loud involuntarily, and the sound resounded through the entire back mountain, startling the birds all over the mountain. His emotions infected Kuina next to her, and she looked at Sorata with a gentle smile on her face. Although she didn't know why Sorata laughed suddenly, she could feel the unprecedented happiness of Sorata from the laughter. This kind of happiness was never seen in Sorata before. Koshiro, who was meditating on the grass mat in the front yard of the sword gym, heard the laughter from the backyard, and his slightly squinted eyes suddenly widened a little. The child seems to have finally untied the knot in his heart. He nodded with a smile on his lips, then he pondered for a while, stood up, and walked outside. It looks like this kid will go to sea in a few years, so I have to prepare a gift for him. Sorata stopped laughing, looked at the stream in front of her, swung her right hand back, and then threw it forward vigorously, throwing Zoro out of her hand. Let's go. Zoro drew a not-so-graceful arc in the air, plop, and fell into the water. As soon as he fell into the water, Zoro woke up, thrashing and roaring loudly. Who threw my uncle into the water? Cough cough, cough cough. Seeing Zoro flopping around, Sorata turned his head and smiled at Kuina. Look at him, doesn't he look like a dog in the water? Ha 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 ha. Kuina rested her hands on Sorata's right shoulder without making a sound, but her slightly squinted eyes and her trembling shoulders betrayed her. Damn it. You wait for my uncle. Zoro glared angrily at the two on the shore. Sorata straightened up and looked at Kuina, then turned to look at Zoro with a smile on his face. Okay, come up and continue training. After speaking, he turned and walked to the training ground with Kuina. Looking at the two backs going away, Zoro slapped the water vigorously with both hands, and the water splashed everywhere. He vented for a while before walking towards the shore. Hey, wait for me. The sound floated far away. Chapter 4: The Sailing Ship Entangling the Giant Dragon. Early morning. On the beach of Simojiji village, the voices of Sorata's mischief and Zoro's roar can be heard from afar. 121, 121. Zoro, you need to speed up. No road race. Looking at the back of Kuina in front, Zoro hugged Sorata's legs tightly and ran forward at a faster speed. Sorata was now riding on Zoro's neck, spreading the field to put pressure on him. This is what Zoro himself requested, but on the condition that he be carried on his back during morning jogs. Looking at Zoro below him, he couldn't help but increase the pressure. Hey, work harder, Zoro, Kuina's back is almost invisible. Hearing Sorata's gloating voice, Zoro felt his shoulders sink. He gritted his teeth hard, stretched out his right arm to wipe the sweat on his forehead, took a breath, roared, and rushed forward at a faster speed. Go. Ah. As soon as he exerted his strength, the others couldn't keep up. Ahua looked at Zoro passing by, gasped and said, Damn. Zoro has made great progress this year. Yeah, he is now the strongest among all the boys, except for Sorata. Even adults can't beat him. Adao turned her head and wiped the sweat off her forehead, looked at Awa and sighed. Aluo, who was running at the end, suddenly accelerated to Ahua's side, frowning and said, It's a pity we can't train with Sorata. No way, why can't we bear that kind of pressure? The kid who was running ahead also slowed down. Yeah. This guy is the same as Kuina back then, he surpassed all the people in the sword hall at once. Hearing the discussions of the brats behind, the leading brother in the front turned his head and scolded. Okay, don't compare yourself with Zoro. It's not like you don't know how much he usually trains, so hurry up and follow him. Well, can't compare with him, this guy is like a beast. The little ghosts nodded in unison, looking at the backs of Zoro and Sorata from a distance, showing admiration. Yes. Then they roared and strode forward hard. At the end of the beach, turn a corner and walk into a small port, where the sea breeze with a fishy smell is blowing in the salty wetness. This is the only port in Simojiji village. As the stream flows eastward into the sea, the coastlines on both sides are sunken, forming a natural safe haven, and this is where the ships of the village enter the sea. It is a pity that the location of Simojiji village on this small island is really a bit remote, and there are basically no large ships coming and going. The last time Sorata saw a large ship passing by was a few months ago. Although it is still early, the sun has just emerged, but the pier is already bustling with activity, and the fishing boats that got up early to fish have now returned. You can see a dozen small fishing boats, large and small, parked in the harbor. On each fishing boat, there are strong men carrying baskets of fish and shrimp down. Sorata put away the field, looked at Zoro who was lying on the ground panting heavily, raised his foot, and kicked towards his A*. Get up, this level is like a dead dog, when will you surpass Kuina? He pulled Kuina who was watching them from the side and said, really, Kuina? Yes. This guy is still so weak. Kuina looked at the funny Sorata and answered playfully. Her words can also stimulate Zoro a little bit. Zoro's progress this year is really fast, at least faster than her progress in the past. With the increase of age, the front of her body gradually bulges, and she can clearly feel that the progress is slowing down. This made her have to spend more time on strength training. Advertisement as for swordsmanship, as she slowly let go of her obsession with men and women in the past few months, she can feel that the use of swordsmanship has become more relaxed and comfortable. Sorata heard Kuina's answer, looked at her cheeks that became more gentle and playful, and smiled with satisfaction. Let me tell you first, he is not a pervert and he doesn't play any cultivation. As for the whetstone, the culprit that caused Kuina's death, he had already thrown it into the sea, and the attic was sealed off by him. As for when to open it again, it depends on the situation of Kuina. Anyway, the gymnasium is big enough, and there are a lot of empty rooms. It's outrageous, climbing a few meters high stairs, you can fall to your death. For a moment, he wondered if this was a drama played by Koshiro and Kuina. Unfortunately not. At least until he crossed over, there was no news of Kuina in One Piece, whether it was comics or anime. Let's go and see what delicious seafood is available today. He pulled Kuina and walked towards the pier. Wait for me. Zoro's slightly panting voice sounded behind him. Walking into the harbor, you can hear the voices of many merchants and fishermen bargaining. These merchants are bridges connecting villages, information and goods. Most of these people are villagers from mountain villages on this island. They transport the fish and shrimp here back to the mountain, and then transport the fruit beasts from the mountain. Earn on both sides. Sorata and the others walked straight to the largest fishing boat. They said that it was the largest, but compared to other fishing boats, this boat was just a small sailing boat about 10 meters long and several meters high. This boat belongs to Yixin Dojo, and it is mainly responsible for going to other islands to buy food, and it will also go fishing from time to time. The busy burly man on the boat looked at the three of Sorata who were coming, and quickly turned his head and shouted into the cabin. Uncle Yiku, Sorata and the others are here. Okay, come out right now. I saw an old man with white hair and a goatee beard walking out of the cabin holding a big fish basket in his hand. Seeing the old man, Sorata quickly jumped into the boat, walked quickly to the old man's side, reached out to take the fish basket, turned around and put it on the side of the boat. The old man wiped his hands gently on the apron in front of his chest, then pulled out a pipe from his waist, and then took out shredded tobacco and stuffed it into the body of the pipe. Then he took out the lighter from his trouser pocket, turned the gears, and lit the tobacco with a crack. The old man first leaned against the railing beside the boat, then raised his pipe, squinted his eyes, and smoked heavily. He raised his head slowly, looked at Kuina who was coming up behind Sorata through the smoke. Mulu recalled and joked. Kuina, you really look more and more like your mother. Kuina stepped forward quickly, lying on Kong's back, poking her head over his shoulder and looking down at the fish baskets on the deck. Uncle Yiku, did you gain anything today? Before Yiku could answer, Zoro, who had just climbed onto the boat, rushed to them and pulled off the lid of the fish basket. At this time, I looked into the basket again, and saw that the fish basket was full of fat and strong lobsters. When these big lobsters suddenly saw the light, they wanted to scramble to get out, but they were stacked together, and they couldn't get out after pulling one by one. What? It's lobster again, I'm tired of eating it. Zoro dropped the lid and shouted down at the lobster in the fish basket. Boom! Yiku looked at Zoro who was shouting loudly, and immediately raised his hand and punched him on the head. You stinky brat, isn't it enough to have lobster? This is the most delicious food around here. Yeah. Zoro, why are you so dissatisfied? Seeing Yiku go crazy, Sorata and Kuina quickly took a step back and nodded frantically. Hiss. It hurts. Zoro squatted on the ground, covered his head with his hands, looked up at Sorata who retreated to the side, and shouted loudly. Advertisement, hey. You two guys are really disrespectful. I don't know who said it last time. I'm tired of eating lobster. Ichiku looked at Kuina with his flickering face through the smoke, and Kuina quickly shook his head to express that he hadn't said anything. His gaze then turned to Sorata, who shrugged and said with a serious face, Uncle Yiku, don't you know me yet? How could I say that? After speaking, he turned his head to meet Zoro's angry eyes and winked at him. At this time, the smiling strong man next to them said, Hey, Uncle Yiku, don't tease them. Isn't there a big cargo in the cabin? Zoro looked up at Yiku in surprise, and Yiku took a puff of cigarette before looking down at Zoro. What are you looking at? Go and carry it in the cabin. Zoro cheered, jumped up, and ran to the cabin. Yiku then looked at the big man next to him. Kyubi, go help that brat. Yes, Uncle Yiku. Kyubi followed Zoro into the cabin after listening. Sorata walked to Yiku's side and said, Uncle Yiku's news today? You little brat, why are you in such a hurry? He put down his pipe, knocked it on the side of the boat, fumbled with his left hand, took out a stack of papers from his pocket, and handed it to Sorata. Here. This is the news these days. Sorata took the paper and unfolded it, leaning against the side railing of the boat, and looked down. The first article of the news was impressively written, Goa Kingdom World Noble Ceremony. Then looked down, it turned out to be prepared for the Celestial Dragons. Sorata stroked her chin and thought about it thoughtfully. Celestial Dragons, Goa Kingdom, King Luffy, Windmill Village. Suddenly his eyes lit up. It seems that Sabo was bombed by the Celestial Dragons and flew over the ship, and then was rescued by the dragon. Could it be this Celestial Dragons? If it's the Celestial Dragons, then it should be tonight. What? At this moment, he suddenly sensed something, turned his head towards the stern, and looked seriously at the distant sea. What's wrong? Sorata. Kuina noticed Sorata's strangeness, and followed him to the stern suspiciously. The ship, a very large ship. Boat? At this time, Yiku also came over, looking out of the port suspiciously. In addition to the clouds and waves, there are only a few seagulls across the sky from time to time. Looking back, he glanced at Sorata with a hint of shock in his eyes. This kid's observation haki is too powerful. He is the old man who came here from Wano Kuni with Kosaburo back then. Of course he knows that he can't sense it. What does it mean that this kid can sense it? At this time, the cabin suddenly became lively. At first glance, it turned out that it was Awa and the other little ghosts who climbed onto the boat one after another, and then rushed into the cabin, yelling. The senior brother who led the team searched around, and found Sorata and the others at the stern of the boat. Seeing Sorata and the others staring into the distance, he didn't ask, but just followed their eyes and looked into the distance together curiously. At this moment, a faint black spot appeared between the distant sea and sky. As time passed, the black spot gradually became clearer. From a distance, it was a huge sailing boat dozens of meters long and about 10 meters high above the water, with a giant dragon wrapped around its hull. From a distance, it looks like a living dragon, swimming towards the port from the distant sea. The speed of the sailboat was very fast, and it arrived outside the harbor in a short while. When seeing the huge figure on the bow, Sorata gradually revealed an expression of excitement. It's really them. Chapter 5 The Legendary S******** King. As the giant dragon-head sailing boat gradually approached, everyone on the pier stopped what they were doing and looked over one by one. This ship is too big. Yeah, I haven't seen such a big boat for a long time. Hey, you see, there seems to be a face on the bow of the ship. Yeah, such a big face is so weird. Could it be a kite? It's too far away to see what it is. The early morning sea breeze could not blow away the whispers of the people on the pier. They looked curiously at the big ship that was getting closer. Because the dragon-head sailing boat was too big and the draft was too deep to get in, it had to stop outside the harbor in the end. At this time, a small boat could be seen slowly lowering from the big boat, and the big face that was at the bow of the boat jumped off the big boat lightly. Boom! I could see the whole boat heaving violently, as if it was about to capsize, but fortunately, the boat finally stabilized stubbornly. Behind him, several people dressed in the same black robe came down one after another along the boat ladder. When they got closer, everyone could see clearly that it was really a person. Her whole face was as big as the prow of a boat. Except for her face exposed, the rest of her body was covered in a black robe. According to visual estimation, she was more than 4 meters tall. From the exposed face, you can see the long and thick eyelashes and the exaggerated big mouth. The eyes and lips are painted with light blue eyeshadow and purple lip gloss. The little ghosts who were carrying fish in the cabin with Zoro Kyubi heard the noise outside, quickly put down their work, and rushed out to watch the excitement. Awa lay on the guardrail, pointed at the boat coming towards this side in surprise and said, "Did you see that man with a huge face?" This is the first time I've seen such a person," Adao responded with wide-eyed eyes. Arlo then added, "Look, that boat is huge, too." The other friends nodded one after another. Zoro came out of the cabin with a tuna bigger than him on his shoulders, followed by Kyubi who was carrying a fish basket in each hand. He looked around first, but didn't find Sorata and the others, and then shouted at Ahua and the others, "Did you see Sorata and Kuina?" At the stern. At this time, Awa turned his head, pointed at Zoro excitedly and shouted at the sea, "Zoro, look at the big-faced monster." Zoro followed the direction of his finger, glanced at it, and lost interest. "Zoro, what are you doing?" Zoro turned his head and stared at Sorata and the others who were coming from behind. "Didn't you always want to know my strength? Let me show you today." Zoro looked at Sorata's excited expression, full of doubts. He had never felt so excited about Sorata in this year. "I haven't fought much since the breakthrough. When I went to find Master, he always didn't try his best." Sorata turned his head to Yiku next to him and said excitedly, "Today I can finally try my best to see my own strength. Uncle Yiku, please protect them later." He looked at Ahua and the others. "Hey, Sorata, stop looking down on people, we don't need protection." "Yes, we are also very strong." The little ghosts danced and yelled, and Arlo jumped out to put on a muscle show. "Shut up, brats, the other side is not something you can handle." At this time, Yiku roared with a sudden change of expression. When he saw that face, he realized that he had seen it somewhere. "I didn't see it clearly from too far away before, but now that I'm close and I can see it clearly, I finally remembered it." "What's wrong?" Advertisement. Seeing Yiku's face suddenly change, Sorata asked knowingly. "I remembered." "What?" "I remembered who that big face was." "Who is it?" Everyone looked at Yiku curiously, waiting for his answer. Yiku took a deep puff on his cigarette and then said with a serious face, "If you think about it, that person should be a legendary person in recent years." The legendary man. It is said that his medical skills are superb, and he once saved people in countries on the verge of death that doctors believed were hopeless, and left behind a relief legend, the strongest transvestite king in history, Emporio Ivankov. What? It turned out to be a doctor. At this moment, Awa pushed the mirror frame and interrupted excitedly. By the way, the king of S*********. What exactly is a S********? Apparently he was more interested in S*******. S******. How should I say it? It should be half human and half demon. Aluo nodded, and touched her chin with her right hand, showing an expression of understanding Wong. Boom, boom. Yiku raised his pipe and gave each of them a sip. Don't interrupt, you brats. Aluo and Awa hurriedly stood up straight and bowed and said, SMI Masai. Yiku paused for a few seconds, squinted his eyes and continued. Don't just treat him like an ordinary doctor, he is the one who was offered a reward of 85.3 million berry by Marine. 85.3 million. The surroundings suddenly became quiet, and everyone froze in place. Doctor, etc. They didn't take it seriously. But 85.3 million, they still know what such a reward means, because their highest reward in East Blue is only about 20 million berry. Sorata knew from the beginning that it was the king of Emporio Ivankov. It was precisely because he knew who it was that he was so excited. The other party would not attack civilians, and his strength was strong enough, so he could attack without any scruples, and he could pretend to be a misunderstanding afterwards. Okay, plan pass. A gust of sea breeze blew by, and the still picture suddenly came alive, and then the noise sounded. Are you kidding, Sorata, are you going to fight this monster? Yeah, even Sorata, you can't defeat 85.3 million monsters. Okay, stop arguing, it's not a deathmatch, I just went to him to discuss it. Looking at the noisy brats, he explained in a relaxed tone. Then he looked at Kuina and said, Kuina, lend me the word hedao. Kuina's left hand gripping the knife tightened, looking at Sorata slightly worried. He saw Kuina's worry, stretched out his right hand to cover her head, and said in a gentle voice, Kuina, as long as I don't want to, no one can hurt me. Yes, no one could hurt Sorata. Kuina relaxed slowly, took the knife from his waist, and handed it to Sorata. Sorata, do your best, I also want to know the gap between us. Okay. His voice was firm and powerful. Sorata took the knife, raised it in front of him with his left hand, held the handle with his right hand, and slowly pulled out a segment. The blade rubbing against the scabbard made a crisp sound. Zheng, one character of He Dao, one of the 21 works of Dakue Dao. The handle and scabbard are white, simple and unadorned. It is a hidden sword. According to Hitoru Tengayama, this sword was made by Shimotsuki Kozaburo together with Enma. Advertisement, good knife. Sorata gently closed the knife and sheathed it. Ding, then he took off the ordinary knife that was hanging on his left waist, threw it to Kuina, and explained, this knife can't withstand my full swing. Then he hung the word hedao on his waist, looked up at Kuina and Zoro, turned around and jumped out of the boat with the knife in his left hand. Zoro quickly dropped the fish, ran to the side of the boat with Kuina, lay on the railing, and looked at Sorata running on the sea. Behind Ivankov, a young man wearing a hat with rabbit ears was paddling vigorously, and suddenly looked ahead in surprise. Hey, look, there's a man running towards us at sea. Snapped, a big slap gave him the back of the head neatly, and another young man behind him cursed and said, Yifu, what kind of dream is it in broad daylight? Who the hell can run on the sea? If anyone can run on the sea, I will eat the ore on the spot, up. After a pause for a few seconds, he suddenly found that the surroundings were quiet. He quickly stopped what he was doing, followed everyone's gaze, and looked forward. Suddenly, his eyes were so big that their eyeballs protruded. There is really a man running on the sea. Yifu turned his head to look at him and laughed triumphantly. You see, what you said just now, you know. As he spoke, he handed him the ore in his hand. The young man behind quickly put away his expression, turned his neck in a daze, looked around Nan and said to himself, what, did I just say something? I didn't say anything. He became more and more determined as he spoke, nodding his head and looking at Kazuo solemnly. Yifu's hand holding the ore was trembling. He looked at him in surprise, and sighed, you are really shameless. Thank you for the compliment. Shut up. Yes, Lord Ivan. While the two were arguing, Ivankov had already spotted Sorata, and she frowned slightly. It's all right, Ms. Ivan. It's all right, Lightning, just saw an interesting boy. I saw a man who was also wearing a black robe, wearing orange-blue glasses on his forehead. His hairstyle was similar to the Club Blossom. In playing cards, his hair was half orange on the left and half white on the right, and there was a lightning scar from his forehead to his right eye. Female. She looked ahead calmly and gently, with her right hand straight and palm down, and her left hand gracefully shook the red wine glass in her hand and said, It's amazing, it can actually run on water. As she spoke, she raised her glass and took a sip. Ms. Ivan, this boy seems to be aiming at us. What to do? What to do? It's coming for us. Ivankov, with his legs bent and trembling in a sudden exaggerated movement, opened his mouth and shouted. Master Ivan, are you okay? Seeing Ivankov like this, Yifu shouted worriedly. Talent, talent, talent. Ivankov's precarious body suddenly turned 180 degrees, and raised his hands. I won't be afraid. Kazuo and the others on board laughed and applauded wildly. So I'm not afraid. I was tricked again, ha ha. Lightning stood aside, looking at them with a smile on his face. For the upcoming Sorata, she is not nervous at all. After all, this is East Blue, the weakest sea. Chapter 6: A duel against the legend. On the pier in the harbor of Shiji village, Seymour, there was a lively noise. Wow, what is little Sorata doing here? He wouldn't want to fight that titan. No way. After all, depending on the size, the strength is too different. It's hard to say. After all, it's little Sorata. Yeah, little Sorata is amazing. Everyone on the pier looked curiously at the two confronting each other on the sea. Although they had seen Sorata training by the sea with a barbell as big as a mountain on his back, they still felt a little worried for him. Because just looking at the body shape, the two people were too different. Sorata stopped in front of the boat, looked at the crowd of Ivankov laughing wildly, raised the corner of her mouth, and shouted excitedly. Emporio Ivankov. Ivankov turned his head and leaned forward, his head sticking out of the bow. Because his head is too big, it blocks the sunlight and casts a large shadow on the sea. And Sorata was standing right in his shadow. He looked down at Sorata and asked in surprise, "Lovely boy, do you know me? I'm just here to discuss with you, please be serious, or you may die." Sorata looked at Ivankov, who was approaching, and didn't answer anything, but just stated his intentions. Then he bent his left leg, took a step back with his right foot, leaned forward, raised the knife and stared at Ivankov closely, and slowly held the handle of the knife with his right hand, making an offensive posture. At this moment, Ivankov seemed to be really intimidated by Sorata's momentum. His head quickly shrank back, cold sweat broke out, his hands waved in front of him again and again, and he spoke incoherently. Please stop, don't take out that kind of weapon. It's dangerous, people will die. If you get cut, die. He retreated to the middle of the boat, suddenly raised his head and chest, raised his hands high and shouted loudly, I can't die. So it's impossible to die, I was tricked again. Then there was a burst of wild laughter. The corner of Sorata's mouth twitched wildly. This guy doesn't take him seriously. With his right hand holding the knife, his entire arm grew bigger, and a circle of light black gas wrapped around the knife along the handle. His current arm strength and quantity are still relatively low, so he can only do so. Raising his head and staring at the back of Ivankov's neck, his feet suddenly stepped on the sea surface dozens of times at high speed. Shave. Whoosh. The sea under his feet suddenly sank, and his whole body rushed towards Ivankov at an extremely fast speed. Ivankov seemed to sense something, and suddenly turned around and blinked his left eye in front of him. Hellwinks. A shockwave went forward, and Sorata appeared just in front of the shockwave's trajectory, and he quickly drew his knife. Shave, draw the knife and chop. Boom, a wave of air rushed in all directions from the place of impact. Sorata and Shockwave only stood in a stalemate for a few seconds before being quickly shot backwards by the shockwave's enormous force. His body quickly slid across the surface of the sea, plowing a long ravine, and he retreated tens of meters before stopping. Looking at the small boat drifting outward with the airwaves in the distance, Sorata's excited face flashed a trace of solemnity. Really strong, it's just a casual blow, the power is so great, it seems that you can only use your full strength. He rose up from the sea and stood on the surface of the sea in the air, without a drop of seawater on his body. But at this time, everyone on the boat shouted excitedly, Here it is, Mr. Ivan's very ordinary blink of an eye, a wink from hell. Advertisement Lightning stood aside calmly, without any excitement from the crowd. Although her body was up and down with the bumpy boat, his legs were firmly nailed to the boat, motionless. She gracefully raised her glass, took a sip of the red wine, and looked up at Ivankov. Ms. Ivan, you can't fight at sea anymore, this small boat can't bear it. I can feel that the cute boy is not malicious, it seems that it is really just a simple discussion. Ivankov looked at the creaking boat and thought for a moment. He raised his head and shouted to Sorata in front of him, Hey, cute boy. What are you doing? If you want to compete, go to land. If you want me to take it seriously, you have to give me room to play. Sorata looked awkwardly at the boat pointed at the opposite side, held the handle of the knife, swayed the knife beautifully, and put the knife back into the sheath. He glanced at the boat, turned around and walked towards the pier. Come along, Sorata, are you okay? Back on the boat at the pier, everyone gathered around. Sorata smiled and waved her hand. How could something happen? I just tried it out, and we will fight again when they get to the shore later. Still fighting, the aftermath of that blow almost blown me away, Awa exclaimed with an exaggerated expression. Everyone nodded. At this moment, there was a burst of greetings from the village. Mr. Koshiro. Good morning, uncle. How did Mr. Koshiro come out today? Well, I just heard something, so I came out and walked around. With a smile on his face, Koshiro nodded to the fishermen one by one, and answered one or two sentences from time to time. When everyone on the boat heard the sound, they all turned their heads to look at the pier, saw Koshiro coming towards this side, and they got off the boat quickly. The gymnasium is on the mountainside behind the port, not far from here, and you can see the entire port at a glance. Koshiro walked to the side of the boat, watched everyone get off the boat one by one, and then asked Ichiku, Uncle Ichiku, tell me what's going on. I heard the movement from a long way away. Ichiku briefly explained the matter, and then Koshiro looked at Sorata behind Ichiku. Sorata, you are too reckless. Sorata shrugged at Koshiro, and muttered. Who told you that every time you consult with the master this year, you are perfunctory? He raised his brows, and then spoke in an excited tone. I happened to meet a strong man today, of course I have to fight well, so I can clearly know what level one I'm at now. A look of embarrassment flashed across Koshiro's calm face. He was simply annoyed by Sorata. In the past few years, Sorata would come to him to compete with him almost every few days. Especially in the past year, as Sorata was promoted to the realm of swordsman, the frequency of coming to him increased significantly. How can this work? He, Koshiro, has been staying in Yixin dojo just out of trouble. In addition, his temperament is more casual, which makes it more perfunctory. In fact, at the level of swordsman, there is no progress in simple sparring. What is needed is to fight with all your strength. For him and Sorata, it is impossible to use full strength. Jianhao's lethality is too great, and he will suffer serious injuries if he is not careful. Boom! Koshiro looked in the direction of the sound, and happened to meet Ivankov, who had just landed. He pushed the frame of the mirror with his hand, and put away his always smiling expression. Why did a big shot like you appear in East Blue and come to this remote Seymour GG village? Advertisement, I also want to say that East Blue actually has someone as strong as you. Ivankov looked at Koshiro with a solemn face. He was at ease with Sorata, but he didn't feel much threat, but the squinting eyes on the other side were different. It is difficult for ordinary people not to feel the aura of the strong if they don't take the initiative to radiate it. But to people of the same level, it is like a light in the dark night, not only bright, but also very dazzling. Unless you deliberately hide it, it is difficult not to be discovered. What are you doing here? Koshiro asked to Ivankov's group. Don't be so nervous, we're just here to replenish supplies and buy some food. At this moment, lightning came out from behind Ivankov. He gracefully shook the red wine glass in his left hand, raised it to his mouth, took a sip, and then spoke Kaido. Food? Little Ivan, as long as you beat me, I'll give you as much as you want. Sorata took Lightning's words and looked at Ivankov. Hey, it's too casual to be called Little Ivan. The few guys who came down one after another after the lightning shouted loudly. That's right, it's Mrs. Ivan the S********* King who is right. The corner of Ivankov's mouth curled up when he heard this, and he grinned and said, Be quiet, boys, it's just a small matter of what to call. It doesn't matter what the name is. Even if you call me shit, it's fine. Poop? Surprisingly quiet around, everyone watched his performance. At this moment, the guy suddenly turned around in a circle, raised his hands and raised his head, shouting loudly. I don't want to be called a poop. It turned out to be annoying. I was tricked again. The guys behind him yelled in unison. Sorata's body trembled slightly, and a gloomy expression appeared on his face. He looked at the few people opposite and roared angrily. You guys, how much do you look down on me, so you don't take me seriously? As he spoke, he suddenly teleported behind Ivankov. Before Ivankov could react, he kicked his A**. Boom, suddenly kicked. Ivankov's tall body fell forward to the ground, splashing a lot of dust. Sorata breathed a sigh of relief. It was really uncomfortable for these guys to take him lightly over and over again. He gracefully landed on the position where Ivankov was standing just now, and said to the front, Can I pay more attention now? You be ****************** D. What did you do to Lord Ivan? Seeing Ivankov who fell to the ground, Kazuo and the others stared at Sorata angrily. Lightning, who was standing next to Ivankov and drinking red wine gracefully, thought of something when he watched Sorata who suddenly appeared. He took a quick step back, his face suddenly changed, his hands were lowered and he stared at Sorata warily. This guy's speed is so fast. No, it's not speed. No matter how fast it is, it's impossible not to feel it. You guys ate space fruits. Sorata ignored Lightning, but excitedly looked at Ivankov who was lying on the ground. He could sense a momentum rising from the other party. Are you finally going to be serious? Okay Lightning, take it easy. Ivankov sat up from the ground, staring at Sorata with a little curiosity. What was your ability just now? You'll know it once you hit it. It is good. Ivankov stood up with his hands on the ground. He looked around, and finally stopped on the beach on the left side of the harbor. It's impossible to fight here. Go there. The place is big enough. Then he turned his head and said to Lightning and the others, You guys wait for me for a while, I'll go and. He suddenly got stuck, thought for a while, looked down at Sorata and asked, By the way, little boy, what's your name? Sorata, the emptiness of space, the tie of space. Sorata is serious Kaido. The corner of Ivankov's mouth twitched, and he turned and walked towards the beach on the left. Hey, little Ivan wait for me. Sorata hurriedly followed, hearing the movement behind. Ivankov walked faster. Chapter 7 See the peak, let's move towards the peak. On the beach. The two stood facing each other, and compared to Ivankov's ease, Sorata was obviously much heavier. Sorata looked at Ivankov, his tall body with his back facing the sun and glowing halo, his eyes suddenly shrank. The faint starlight in the eyes swiveled quickly around the middle. It's like a black hole, as if it wants to pull the entire starry sky into his eyes. Profound, mysterious and full of deadly charm. At this moment, an invisible momentum emanated from Sorata's body. Noticing the change in Sorata, Ivankov slowly let go of his contempt, and his face became a little more serious. If Sorata was a kitten before, she is now a tiger, and the level of danger has increased dozens of times. Hee-hop. Ivankov grinned and roared, tore off the black robe, twirled his hands up, and revealed the strange clothes under the black robe. I saw him wearing a tight-fitting ultra-low-cut jumpsuit, a mesh cloak and stockings, a big skull tattooed on his abdominal muscles, and a dark purple explosive head, which was unusually huge. He stretched out his right hand, turned his palm up, and hooked his palm to Sorata. "Come on, little Sorata," he. Ha! On the pier, among the crowd watching the battle, at some point, Lightning put on his glasses and suddenly turned into a man. He looked at the two people who were facing each other on the beach, a trace of solemnity flashed in his eyes. "Are you serious, Ms. Iwan, and that brat is completely different from just now?" Looking at Ivankov, who showed his full figure, Ahua showed a suddenly realized expression, and then shouted in surprise. "Wow, so he is pervert. He started on the boat, and until now, he still wondered what a transvestite is." "To shut up." Yifu turned his head, stared at Ahua viciously and shouted. "How can you brat be so unreasonable to Master Ivan? He knows ladyboys are perverts, but Ivankov is different. Ivankov is a new human being, a new ladyboy. He is not only the king of ladyboys, but also one of the leaders of the revolutionary army they respect." "What? I want to fight," Ahua shouted at Yifu, taking advantage of the large number of people. "That's right, what's the matter, isn't pervert still being told?" Arlo continued. "Come on." Yifu rolled up his sleeves, showing his muscles, stretched out his fingers arrogantly, and hooked Ahua and the others. "If you have the ability, you go together, and I will hit 10. "Shut up." At this time Lightning and Koshiro spoke at the same time, obviously they couldn't stand it anymore. The two sides looked at each other, turned their heads together, and let out a hum from their noses. Quiet. Kuina and Zoro stood in the crowd without speaking. They were all staring at Sorata, tense and focused. Sorata tucked her hands into her sleeves, shook her shoulders, and slowly took off her top, revealing her muscular upper body and 8-pack abs. It was hard to believe that this was the body of an 11-year-old child. He leaned forward, gripping the handle of the knife tightly. He stared up at Ivankov closely, his eyes twinkling. Space field. A transparent space expands quietly. Stress reliever. Shave, simultaneously launch. With a sound of whoosh, it disappeared in place. As for why he didn't teleport directly, of course there is no acceleration and the power is too low. With his current strength, facing someone far stronger than him, he might not be able to break through the defense by teleporting directly. Watching Sorata rushing towards him, Ivankov took a step back and blinked his left eye at Sorata. Hell winks. A pink shockwave rushed towards Sorata quickly. Just when the shockwave was about to collide with Sorata, his forward body instantly disappeared in place. Teleport. Sorata stepped over the shockwave and appeared in front of Ivankov in an instant. He didn't give Ivankov time to react at all. The space domain expanded, and in an instant, Ivankov's entire body was shrouded in it. Supercharge. Draw your sword and chop, all in one go. Ivankov's eyes flashed red, and when Sorata first appeared, he wanted to react. But when he wanted to raise his right hand and punch Sorata, a burst of terrifying pressure hit him instantly, and he couldn't help but pause. Although he broke free from the pressure in an instant, it was enough for Sorata to swing the knife during this pause. Staring at the sharp blade glowing coldly in front of him, Ivankov only had time to hastily put a layer of armament hockey on his chest. Clang, a storm formed by air pressure spread from Ivankov's chest to the surroundings, splashing gravel. After only a moment of stalemate, Ivankov was quickly pushed backward by the terrifying force on the blade in front of him. Advertisement: his feet plowed 2 gullies about 10 meters long on the sand. Ivankov stopped, feeling a dull pain in his chest, and looked down. I saw a faint blood-red wound on his chest, and blood was seeping out. Although due to hasty response, he didn't have time to mobilize all the hockey, but being able to cut his hockey and hurt him, at the age of 11, it's too pervert. If it wasn't for his quick response, if hockey was a little slower, this embarrassment would be embarrassing, and I don't know how to be laughed at by the dragon. He raised his head and stared at Sorata floating in the air, his pupils shrank slightly and his face gradually became serious. It can still fly. Sorata stood in the air, looked down at his hand, and rewound hockey's zonkong, with a satisfied smile on his face. Sure enough, fighting the strong can refine hockey even more. Although the quantity cannot be increased, the quality can be increased. Every hockey strongman comes from hard work. In the previous collision with Ivankov, his hockey collapsed in an instant. If it wasn't for the opponent's hasty response, he wouldn't be able to break through the opponent's hockey defense. This is the difference in hockey quality. Like, the difference between iron ore and steel. Low-level armament hockey is iron ore, and only through continuous tempering can low-level hockey evolve into high-level steel. Ivankov looked at Sorata and sighed, "Young Sorata, you are really amazing. But you have to be careful next time. Let you experience the essence of the S***** boxing technique that Kamabaka hits right in the middle of it." As he spoke, he took off on the spot, spun 360 degrees in the air, landed lightly, and drew a word in front of him with both hands. As for what that word is, no one knows it anyway. His left hand is relaxed at his waist, and his right hand is spread out into a palm, pointing at Sorata. He hop. Sorata stared at Ivankov's flamboyant boxing, dumbfounded. Is this the boxing method? It's really a second class. Ivankov withdrew his right hand, raised his hands slightly on his shoulders, relaxed all over, and shouted with a smile. Okay, come here. He hop. You thought you were Bruce Lee. You're still laughing, why aren't you laughing? Sorata pursed her lips, resisted the desire to complain in her heart, held the knife in both hands and lifted it up, raised it above her head, and stomped on the ground with both feet. Whoosh! Sound. The body shot towards Ivankov like an arrow from the string. When he got close, he slashed at his chest fiercely. Shave slash. Ivankov was already prepared for this time, and the little pressure in the space field could only affect his speed a little bit. He continued to attack Sorata with the tip of the knife in his hand at super high speed. Fist, dream strike handling fist, clang. The hand and the knife bounced off each other as soon as they collided, and then collided quickly again. Clang clang clang. The blade collided wildly with the hand knife covered with black hockey, and only the afterimage and the flashing cold light of the knife could be seen. Between electric light and flint, clang, the two collided again and wrestled with each other. During the interval of wrestling, Ivankov suddenly blinked at Sorata below. Hell winks. Feeling the oncoming shockwave, Sorata used all his strength to hit Ivankov's hand, and with this reaction force, he jumped back. Boom, where he was originally standing, a big crater was blown out by the shockwave. Little Ivan, don't talk about wooed, sneak attack. Looking at the big hole in the ground, Sorata pretended to be in a state of lingering fear, and stretched out his left hand to wipe the sweat that was not there on his forehead. Not at all, Ivankov yelled, then he blinked quickly at Sorata. Hell winks, hell winks, hell winks, shish. Wave after wave of shockwaves quickly hit Sorata. Sorata didn't pay much attention to the shockwave in front of him. He expanded the domain, stretched the space, let the shockwave rush into his domain, and the speed dropped sharply. He stood calmly on the spot and quickly swung his knife, cutting apart the incoming shockwaves one after another, just like cutting through air bubbles. Seeing that this trick is useless against Sorata, Ivankov kicked his feet hard on the ground and ran quickly around Sorata. He ran faster and faster, and his high-speed movement produced countless afterimages of his face. Face afterimage. From a distance, there are countless big faces surrounding Sorata. Looking at the afterimages around her, Sorata put on a defensive posture. There was a red light in his eyes. Found it. Then he swung his knife quickly and slashed at one of the afterimages. A silver-gray slash passed through the afterimage, leaving a deep knife mark on the beach behind. Little Sorata, useless. Advertisement. Each of my afterimages may be real, or each of them may be false. All the afterimages simultaneously opened their mouths and roared loudly. Are you ready for the storm? He hop? Ivankov reminded, blinking quickly. All the afterimages of the face gave death winks at the same time. Galaxy winks. Countless shockwaves 10 times stronger than the winking eyes of death shot towards Sorata like missiles, leaving him nowhere to escape. Sensing the fluctuations around him, Sorata quickly sheathed his sword and clasped his hands together. He's not going to run away, that's exactly what he wants. Sorata slowly closed her eyes, and the soul of Chu-Er burst out. How many floors do I have to carry a bag of rice? How many floors do I have to carry a bag of rice? How much do I have to pay for a bag of rice? And I have to wash a bag of rice. At the moment when the shockwave was about to approach, he suddenly opened his eyes, his pupils dilated, and the space around his body instantly collapsed inward. Then he pushed hard to the sides with both hands, and a powerful force rushed towards the surroundings at an even faster speed. Pseudo Shenluo Tianzheng. This was done by imitating Shenluo Tianzheng. In fact, it is to compress the space in the space field, ultimately compress it for a moment, and then explode it. The two forces were in a stalemate for only a moment, and then a shocking explosion occurred with a bang. The sand rushed towards the surroundings with a more powerful shockwave, which instantly dispersed all the afterimages and sent the real Ivankov flying. Boom! Ivankov's back slammed into the mountain wall behind the beach. Because of his size, it was as if the whole mountain shook for a moment. The people on the pier rushed towards the village as early as the moment the explosion occurred. Seeing the impact Namikaze storm approaching rapidly behind him, the brats like Ahua wished they had a few more legs. Run! The storm is coming. As soon as they hid, the storm hit, and the whole street was instantly emptied. The people hiding behind a house were dumbfounded when they heard the whistling wind. Is this something a human can do? What an exaggeration. Kuina looked out, a look of concern in her eyes. Koshiro saw her state and pushed the frame. Don't worry Kuina, Sorata is fine. I'm not worried, I'll always trust Sorata. Kuina paused and gave Koshiro a careful look. I'm just wondering how much Pele has to pay this time. At this time, a sea fish that was blown into the sky and hung on the eaves happened to fall. Crack. And it hit Koshiro on the head. Koshiro took the fish off his head with no expression on his face, and threw it aside forcefully. He raised his head and stared at the gravel-filled street and the fish, fruit, and rubble rolling in the gravel. The left hand that was pushing the mirror frame trembled. Father, are you okay? Kuina looked up at Koshiro. It's okay, it's just a little Bailey, Koshiro replied nonchalantly. He was ruthless in his heart, and when Sorata came back, he must let Sorata earn twice as much. Okay, let's go out. Koshiro took a step forward and walked outside. The streets outside are full of mess, tiles, fruits, fish. Everywhere. Everyone stepped on the rubble and walked towards the pier. When we arrived at the pier, we saw that there were a dozen or so small fishing boats parked in the port, except for a few larger ones, all of which were blown over on the beach on the right. Under Sorata's position, there is a huge circular pit bottom, slowly seeping seawater upwards. I believe it won't be long before there will be a small pond there. Zoro's eyes widened, fixed on the intact Sorata hovering over the crater. Trembling with excitement. Only when you have seen the power of the peak can you work harder to catch up. He firmly believes that he will be able to catch up. Sensing Zoro's fighting spirit, Kuina's left hand holding the knife tightened. She stared at Sorata calmly, her mind churning. Is this the power of Sorata at its peak? It's really disappointing. It turned out that Sorata had never been serious about practicing against her before. Seymour GG village is too small, so small that even she can be almost invincible. If Zoro hadn't come, she would never have improved so much this year. She could feel that it would not be long before Zoro could surpass her physically. It was so inherent, no matter how unwilling she was, there was nothing she could do. All she could do was to train harder, otherwise she will soon be overtaken by Zoro. Staring at the sandy beach in the distance, Kuina strengthened her faith even more. She will definitely become the strongest female swordsman. Chapter 8. Cutting the space between the splitting void. Boom, Ivankov, who was embedded in the rock wall, pulled himself out and shook the dust off his body. Then he looked up at Sorata, who was unharmed, with a surprised expression. Aren't you hurt? He relieved his slightly stuffy chest, gasped, and sighed. Little Sorata, this ability is really amazing. It's really powerful, and I don't know what fruit ability it is. In fact, Sorata is suffering so much that he can't express it now. After receiving that blow, his physical strength has reached its limit. That's a move that can hit Faba, Solomu Big Bear, with one blow. On the other hand, Ivankov is only slightly out of breath until now. After all, he is only 12 years old now, and his body has not yet grown up. I believe that as he ages in the future, his strength will usher in an explosive growth. After resting for a while, his physical strength recovered a little, and a gleam flashed in his eyes. He yelled at Ivankov, "Little Ivan, let's pretend we're a draw today." Okay, you have the final say. Ivankov has discovered Sorata's state, and he doesn't point it out. What about the food? Food. Sorata stroked her chin. Ivankov looked at him nervously. Of course the food is for you. Sorata suddenly imitated Ivankov's movements, turning in an exaggerated circle and raising her hands high. What? So it was really given to us? Ivankov cooperated, shouting loudly. I've been tricked again. Then they looked at each other and laughed out loud. Ha ha ha, little Ivan, I have a question for you. Ivankov looked at Sorata, who suddenly appeared, already sitting on his shoulder, paused, and stopped laughing. What is the problem? Is it true that your Kamabaka kingdom is full of monsters? Ivankov walked towards the village, and replied. The cuties there are all ordinary people who yearn for the kingdom of transvestites. Oh, is it like this? Sorata stroked her chin with an expression that seemed to be true. Then he nodded and said, I knew it, how could it be all monsters? Then, wouldn't it be impossible to add new people? Little Sorata, you can come to Kamabaka kingdom to play in the future. I think the cuties there will love you very much. Ivankov looked at Sorata and spoke excitedly. After all, you are so cute and beautiful. The kingdom of Kamabaka? Sorata shuddered at the thought of Sanji's plight. Speak in a panic. No. Advertisement. I'm still young and I don't want to go to see it. Yes, I was still thinking, if little Sorata can come to Kamabaka kingdom, I will introduce our country, the most beautiful little cutie to you. Ivankov said, slightly disappointed. Sorata's mind now is full of images of a group of bearded men in pink dresses running on the beach. Thinking of this, he broke out in a cold sweat. It's all right, little Sorata. Why are you sweating so much? Cough. It's okay. Sorata quickly changed the subject. Let's go there quickly. Seeing the crowd waiting for them on the pier, he teleported there first. Hey, wait for me. Is the kingdom of Kamabaka so scary? Ivankov looked at the disappearing Sorata and followed quickly. Seymour Chiki village. One hard dojo. Sorata lay on the roof of the Taoist temple, looked down at the busy figure below, and sighed. Regardless of the appearance of this battle, in fact, only he knows the difference. He tried his best to make Ivankov a little more serious. By the end, he was exhausted and Ivankov was only slightly out of breath. Looking at it like that, Ivankov was equivalent to warming up for the battle just now. Mainly age limits his stamina and hockey. There is nothing he can do about it. This is a natural condition and cannot be changed by manpower. Sorata, what are you doing here? At this moment Koshiro came and sat down next to Sorata. Nothing. It's just that I'm a little depressed thinking that it will take a long time to go to sea. Master, I really want to see the world sooner. Sorata sat up straight and looked at Koshiro with bright eyes. It was the first time he wanted to meet so urgently. Meet this magnificent world. Meet the real legends. Meet the strange species on the Grand Line. There are also Sky Island, Bubble Island, Mermaid Island. For these, just thinking about it made him excited. There had been no such urgency before, but when I really saw other human beings who were completely different from ordinary human beings today. He was excited, eager to see more. This is not the past life comic world. It is really able to touch, communicate, and fight the world together. Sorata, now is not the time for you to go to sea. You are still too young, at least you have to wait until you are an adult. Advertisement. Koshiro pushed down the mirror frame and looked towards the back of the mountain. It's not that Master wants to stop you from going out to sea. The outside world is not as beautiful as you imagined. He paused, and an inexplicable look flashed in his eyes. Even if you want to go to sea, you have to wait for Kuina. That child is all about you now. If you leave, I don't know what will happen to her. Following Koshiro's gaze, he could see Zoro and Kuina who were training crazily at the back of the mountain. Since returning from the port, they have devoted themselves to training harder than ever. Don't worry, Master, I know when to go to sea, and I also know what the world is like. I have the habit of reading newspapers every day. Sorata looked at Kuina in the back mountain, with a trace of tenderness in his eyes. As for Kuina, all I know is that I will never leave her alone in my life. Okay, it's good that you understand. Koshiro looked away, removed the black sheathed long sword hanging from his waist, and looked at Sorata. I wanted to give it to you when you went to sea. But after watching your battle today, I found that your strength has grown too fast. Ordinary swords should be useless for your training. Saying so, Koshiro held up the knife and handed it to Sorata. Take it. Familiarity with knives is also a process. This knife is made according to your usual habits and lengthened proportionally. Even if you are an adult, it should be suitable. Thank you, Master. Sorata excitedly took the knife with both hands, held the handle with his right hand, and pulled it out with a sound of jung. He raised the knife, hovered in front of his eyes, and watched carefully. The spine of the knife is thicker than that of ordinary knives, and the blade is in the shape of a large reverse T-shaped chaotic blade. The blade is silver gray with lavender zigzag patterns. He rubbed the blade with his palm, and could clearly feel the sharpness of the blade. Good knife. Koshiro looked at Sorata excitedly and explained. This knife is modeled after Wanokuni's legendary knife, Autumn Water. This knife is very tough and, due to its higher density, is heavier than other knives of its size. After a pause, he continued, from now on, you will warm up with hockey every day, maybe this knife will become a black knife with you in the future. Black knife. Sorata properly showed doubts, of course he knew what a black knife was. The biggest feature of the black sword is its strength. A swordsman can use his own hockey to temper his own sword into a black sword. Autumn Water is the black knife. Don't worry, Master, I will definitely let him resound throughout the world. Sorata looked at the knife in his hand, and the more he looked at it, the more he liked it. Okay, the knife doesn't have a name yet, so take one. Koshiro smiled at Sorata. Sorata raised the knife above his head, and under the sunlight, the blade had a blue halo. Just call him Zon Kong. Zon Kong. Koshiro looked at Sorata and spoke in surprise. It's cutting the space between the splitting void. Sorata roared excitedly. I hope I can do splitting void in the future. Chapter 9. Evening. The cold moonlight sprinkled the whole world. In Seymour Juji village, the lights of Wanjia have basically been extinguished. Only in the ashram halfway up the mountain, the sound of the bamboo sword being split on the sword target was still heard. Snapped, 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 ... On the dragon head boat. A breeze blew by. A dark figure appeared in the shadows on the deck. Ivankov felt the movement, looked at the shadow and complained. It's really slow, dragon, how long do you want me to wait? Sorry. Holding a child in his arms, Long came out from the shadows. When he got closer, he saw clearly what the dragon was holding in his hand, and Ivankov asked doubtfully, what is it in your hand? The other people on the boat gathered around when they heard the movement, and they were surprised when they saw the child clearly. It hurts so badly. Yes, so cruel, it looks like it was bombed. He needs to be treated quickly. One of them carefully took the child from Long's hand and hurriedly sent it to the ship's doctor's room. Everyone quickly moved out of the way. Watching the man escort the child into the cabin, Ivankov turned his head to the dragon and asked, really, where have you been? Long turned around and said calmly, I went to visit the celebration of the nobles of the world. Why did you go to that kind of place alone without telling me? Ivankov was taken aback. If you're here, it's too conspicuous. Long gradually walked to the side of the boat, looking at the quiet village. Forehead. My face. My face. Ivankov frantically touched his face. Long turned around and said loudly to everyone on the deck, we must gather our strength immediately. Where is the food? Food. The dojo in Murakami sent us some. Kazuo stepped forward and stood up Kaido. Okay. Long turned his head to stare at the dojo on the mountainside in the distance, paused, and suddenly looked at the bow of the boat. I saw a little boy appearing on the dragon head on the bow of the boat. The boy was wearing a moon-white robe with a long knife hanging from his waist. His silver-white hair reflected the white light in the moonlight. He just stood there quietly, with starlight still unfinished in his bright blue eyes with silver mist. Staring at the boy's eyes that are more charming than the starry sky, Long said in a deep voice. Who are you? What's the matter here? Sorata set his sights on the dragon as soon as he arrived. Even though the other party was shrouded in a dark green coat, he still recognized the other party at a glance. The aura as vast as the sea can't be hidden even if you want to hide it. When the dragon looked up at him, he could see the red square tattoo on the left face of the dragon, and the light stubble on the chin. On closer inspection, the dragon actually has no eyebrows. The corner of Sorata's mouth curled up, and he laughed and said, "It's nothing, I just came to see off my friends." Such a strong man is not something he can fight now, not even a single blow. After all, reality is not a comic book, and if the gap is too large, it can really kill him in one hit, even if he cannot be injured, but it is not necessary. He didn't pay much attention to the dragon, but looked at Ivankov. "Hey, little Ivan, do you want to leave without saying goodbye?" Looking at Sorata's gaze, Ivankov asked moodily, "Little Sorata, did you come here to see us off?" Advertisement. "Yes, aren't we friends?" Sorata stared at Ivankov and yelled, "A friend shouldn't leave without saying goodbye. UB asterisk 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 D. Sorry." Ivankov bent over to apologize to Sorata. "My friends, I wish you all the best. This flower of friendship will prompt us to meet again one day." When Ivankov straightened up, only Sorata's faint blessing was left on the scene, and he was moved to tears. Long, with a dazed expression on his face, was stunned by the sight. It wasn't until lightning came and told him what happened during the day that he suddenly realized. A magical boy who can control space. Then he turned around and shouted at everyone, "Get ready to sail, go back to Baratie." Yes, the boat was busy for a while. On the roof of the dojo sword gym. Sorata stood on it for a while. He looked at the sea, lost in thought. The giant ship outside the port has sailed to where it should go by riding the moonlight. On the sea level in the distance, only a small black dot remains. Then in the blink of an eye, it completely disappeared on the sea level, as if it had never been here before. But Ivankov's cries were still faintly floating in the sea, so I knew it was not a delusion. Sorata didn't plan to go at first, but in the end she couldn't hold back and ran to take a look. Monkey D. Dragon. The leader of the Revolutionary Army, the #1 enemy of the world government, and the real world's peak combat power. The gap is a bit big. He shook his head vigorously. So what about the dragon? What about the pinnacle of the world? He has enough confidence to surpass the opponent. Raise your head and look at the sea, with the stars in your eyes. Now that you have seen the peak, let's move towards the peak. Isn't this the romance of One Piece's world? Time flies like an arrow, and 5 years have passed in the blink of an eye. In the forest behind the Taoist temple, there was a sudden sound of weapons clashing. Clang clang clang. Looking closer, I can only see 2 white lights intersecting and colliding in the open space in the woods. 16-year-old Kuina is slim and tall, with long hair tied back into a ponytail with a red headband, and wearing a white tight-fitting exercise suit. She held the knife with both hands above her head, and quickly slashed out, only to see a silver-white slash flying towards Zoro quickly. Zoro was bare-chested, revealing his muscular body, with a green turban wrapped around his head. He holds a long knife in each hand and another dangling from his mouth. It seems that he still has a 3-sword style. He swung his saber 3 times, and quickly slashed towards the flying slash. Ghost slash. Clang. The direction of the slash was changed, and it flew towards the sky, chopping off flying leaves all over the sky. Taking advantage of Zoro's full body strength, Kuina quickly retracted the knife into its sheath during the stalemate, stepped on the ground with both feet, and rushed towards Zoro with a swish. Shave, draw the knife and chop. Seeing the light of the knife in front of him, Zoro only had time to cross his swords, trying his best to block the knife. When, after only a moment of stalemate, he was pushed by this force and shot towards the rear quickly, hitting a giant tree with a boom. Kuina made a beautiful knife with his right hand, put the knife into the sheath, and made a crisp sound. At this time, Sorata's voice sounded from the side, 1 point, so far, the winner is Kuina, 10,000 wins and 0 losses. Hearing Sorata's voice, Kuina turned around, put away her indifferent expression, and showed a smile like a flower blooming. She walked quickly to Sorata and looked at Sorata with a smile. 17-year-old Sorata can no longer see the immaturity he once had. He always has a gentle smile on his resolute and angular face, and silver mist flows in his blue eyes. Advertisement. All this made him look so handsome and masculine. He has a strong and slender figure, and his height of 1.9 meters looks very tall. He was wearing a moon-white robe, with Zon Kong and a wine gourd hanging on his left waist. One Piece world doesn't know how to drink, which is not a good thing. The sea is too big to store fresh water for too long, so a small amount of low-alcohol rum is stored on every ship. And due to the high demand, this kind of wine can be found on almost every island in the world. Seeing Kuina approaching, Sorata spread the pink kimono hanging on her arm and draped it over Kuina. The kimono is embroidered with white flowers, and it is not too beautiful to wear on Kuina, who is now over 1.7 meters tall. Kuina looked tenderly at Sorata, who was helping her tie the belt, and said softly, "Sorata, father, they are waiting for us at the port." Okay. Sorata raised his head and met Kuina's eyes, a trace of tenderness flashed in his eyes, and he stretched out his right hand to help her wipe the sweat from her forehead. Got to say goodbye to Zoro. Kuina took Sorata's hand and held it in her arms. Feeling the touch from his arm, Sorata couldn't help but sigh, and in the end he became the one he hated the most, the one he liked the most, and completed the cultivation. Then he turned his head to look at Zoro, gloated and said, "Zoro, you lost again. Obviously you have really become stronger." Zoro looked at Sorata calmly, immune to such taunts. He could sense that his physical fitness should have already surpassed Kuina, and his sword skills were not so good. He believed that he would be able to truly surpass Kuina in a short time. Compared with Kuina, he can still see the transcendence, but Sorata, this guy, has been bottomless. Originally, I wanted to see Sorata's true strength before he went to sea. But this guy insisted on letting him and Kuina complete this last competition. This is all right, I got a 10,000 defeat achievement. Now you are satisfied, let me see your current strength. Okay, I'll satisfy you. Sorata glanced at Kuina, and Kuina let go of her hands knowingly, stepped back and stood aside. Sorata held Zon Kong with his left hand and walked towards the open space ahead. As he advanced, a whirlwind was created out of thin air, with him as the center, rolled up the fallen leaves all over the ground and floated around. He stood still in the middle, bent slightly, stared at the white clouds in the sky, put his right hand on the handle of the knife, and a stream of light purple-black hockey spun around Zon Kong. When his aura reached its peak, he quickly cut upwards with a knife. God slash. Then the world suddenly became quiet, and he got up, holding back his momentum, as if he had never moved. Ding. At this time, the sound of the knife being sheathed broke the surrounding silence. Only then did he see a lavender-black slash quickly slashing towards the sky. And with unparalleled speed and strength, he cut through the clouds. Suddenly, there was a storm, and everyone in Koshiro, who was on the port, quickly looked up at the sky. Click. I saw a crack in the originally clear sky, followed by lightning and thunder, and the clouds flowed towards the crack like flowing water. Everyone was dumbfounded, staring blankly at the sky. The sky is cracked, is it the end of the world? Aikiku turned his head and stared at Koshiro, who was looking at the back mountain, and asked in surprise, "It's Sorata." Okay. Koshiro didn't even look back, I've grown to this point. Sorata looked at Zoro, who was standing there blankly, and remembered the words Hawkeye used to motivate Zoro, and suddenly said loudly to Zoro in a serious tone. "Zoro, see yourself clearly, understand the world, become stronger. Surpass my sword, surpass me, and you will become the strongest swordsman." Hearing Sorata's voice, Zoro came back to his senses, and stared at Sorata firmly. "You guys wait for me at the strongest position first, from now on I will never lose again, wait for me, wait until I stand in front of you." He has no doubt that Sorata cannot be the strongest, just as he has always firmly believed that he must be the strongest. It is good. Satisfied, Sorata turned and headed towards the port with Kuina. Without Kuina's death, would Zoro still be so determined to become Zoro? He does not know. But today's agreement, he believes that he will be able to achieve it, because he is Zoro, Zoro who has determined the goal must be achieved. Chapter 10: The Cook, Watchman, Helmsman, Boatman, and Navigator. The breeze, the sea, and the sun. A cold mist enveloped the whole world, and the morning sun shone through the thin clouds and scattered on the sea, sparkling. On the blue sea, the early seabirds kept calling. From time to time, a seabird would dive into the sea like a fighter jet, take out a sea fish and fly away. However, no matter how elite fighters are, they sometimes miss. There are always a few seabirds who are unlucky and never come up again. Thinking, it should be that they didn't read the almanac when they went out today. Although this cannot be regarded as such a rare spectacle, for Sorata and his party who just went to sea, it was enough to make them excited. Squeak. The wooden door of the cabin made a dull sound, which startled the seabirds that were combing their feathers above the cabin. I saw a fat man wearing a white chef uniform and glasses, holding a tray in his left hand with 2 glasses of juice on it, pushing the door and coming out. Seeing Sorata lying on the deck chair at the bow, he hurried over and put the juice on the coffee table next to Sorata. "Sorata, look at my lemon apple juice." "Well, thank you, Wa." Sorata put down the nautical book in her hand, raised her head and thanked Awa gently at the side. At this time, on the edge of the watchtower above the mast, a head with a shamat hairstyle suddenly protruded, shouting loudly to the bottom. "Awa, where's my juice?" Ahua pushed his glasses and looked up calmly. "In the kitchen, if you want to drink, go get it yourself. You think you are Sorata and Kuina. Thinking of me serving it for you. You cook, you should serve us fighters well." The young man who killed Matt climbed down the mast, stood on the middle deck of the ship and shouted provocatively. After hearing this, Awa felt veins popping out of his forehead, and rushed towards Shaw Matt, who was wearing leather pants. "Allo, do you guys want to fight?" He thought that he had already gone to sea, so he couldn't be impulsive anymore, he had to be mature and calm. But this guy, Aluo, always finds trouble when he gets on the boat, and he can break his defense every time. At this time, a young man with a sausage mouth walked out of the room on the second floor. He was wearing jeans and a cowboy hat. If he wasn't a bit fat, he really looked like a cowboy. He hurried down the stairs and pulled them apart. "You two guys have to quarrel several times a day. You have been arguing since you were a child, and you have been out at sea. Can't you just stop?" "Adao, don't worry about it. Today I must let this guy know who is the second strongest person on this boat." Awa rolled up his sleeves and was about to have a fight with Aluo. Adao looked at them speechlessly. Earning the penultimate second is so active, why don't you see you challenge Kuina? Say Kuina, and Kuina will arrive. I saw Kuina wearing a pink kimono and slippers, walking up from the stairs next to the cabin. On her dark blue hair, there were still traces of water that hadn't dried up. Advertisement. She wiped her hair, walked past Ahua and the others calmly, and glanced at them lightly as she passed by. With just one glance, the three guys immediately stood up straight. Aluo and Awa, who were originally head-to-head, even made a good friend's appearance by putting their left shoulders on their right shoulders. They are not afraid of each other, not even Sorata, only Kuina. Each of them grew up being beaten by Kuina, and they have psychological shadows. If Zoro hadn't come later, their experience might have been even worse. It wasn't until Kuina walked to the bow that they all heaved a sigh of relief and wiped off their sweat. It took a while for Aluo and Awa, who were hugging each other, to suddenly remember that they were still hugging each other. Then, with disgust on their faces, they quickly let go of each other. As if holding something scary, he took a few steps back quickly, looked at each other, and snorted at the same time, glanced to both sides and spit on the ground. What? Who? Adao looked at these two guys and sighed. I am the third expert on the ship, and I don't have such a good picture as you. He shook his head, took out a cigarette box from his trouser pocket, took out one, and put it in his mouth. Crack, click on it, take a deep breath, and spit out a smoke ring quite chicly. Then with his head held high, he proudly walked past Awa and the two of them, and headed for the cabin. Isn't the juice delicious? Fragrant. Good smell. Sweet and sour. Delicious. Sorata lay lazily on the deck chair, held up the cup, shook it gently, and then took a sip. Looking at the three funny ratios below, he smiled. I have to say that Awa is still very talented as a chef. This guy likes to eat since he was a child, so he has always been fat. Even if his father sent him to the sword gym, he failed to lose weight. This guy returned home 2 years ago to inherit his family's restaurant and became a chef. Before he went to sea, he was already a well-known chef around him. When Sorata started inviting the guy out to sea, he was reluctant. According to him, he eats and drinks at home, so he doesn't go out to sea with Sorata to suffer. In the end, it was Kuina who came out and let this guy come. I don't know what method Kuina used to make this guy run over with a bruised nose and face the next day, crying and begging him to let him board the boat. Why? It's miserable. Seeing how sincere this guy was, he could only reluctantly agree. Advertisement. It's just that Awa will never know that it was Sorata who intentionally or unintentionally revealed to Kuina that he wanted to invite him to go to sea. Thinking about it, he couldn't help showing a smug look on his face. As for Luo, I don't know what he has experienced in the past few years to become a young man who killed Matt. Maybe it's for love. Some time ago, this guy was preparing to follow the arrangement of his family to get married. As a result, when he heard the news that Sorata was going to go to sea, he rushed to pull, and was about to inherit the family shipyard. When he was Poseidon's Adao, he found Koshiro. When Koshiro found Sorata, he was trying to figure out where to find the ship. It's all right now, isn't it coming? It's really timely rain. He agreed on the spot. They are all friends who grew up together. He is not for Adao, a boat builder, and his family's cheap boat. Then he spent all the savings he and Kuina had saved over the years, and borrowed Koshiro several million pellies to pay for the shipbuilding. This is the price that Adao's family only charged for materials. Thinking that he is a dignified traveler, he actually wants to borrow money to build a ship. Thinking of this, he couldn't help saying sorry to all the senior travelers in his heart. He really embarrassed the traversers. This ship is a frigate with a jib sail on the mizzen, a center rudder on the stern, and a sheep's head on the bow. As for why it is a sheep's head, of course it is an imitation of the Mary. As long as you have watched One Piece, who doesn't want to have a ship like the Mary? Not only is it a sheep's head, he also let him build an orchard on the boat, but replaced the orange tree with a lemon tree. The deck of the ship goes up, and the rear cabin has 2 floors. The first floor is the kitchen, and the second floor is the place where the helm and peacetime rest. As for the bedrooms, storerooms and toilets are below deck. His ship, like the Mary, had no steering wheel, and was steered by operating the rudder stick left and right to move the ship's rear planks. As for the cannon, he felt that it was useless if it was close, and it couldn't hit it if it was far away, and the range was not as far as his slash, so he only installed a large cannon in the front cabin, not on the sides. This not only saves space, but also reduces the load, making the sailing of the ship lighter and faster. In addition to the only cannon in the front cabin, there are also anchor winches and some sea necessities that can be used at ordinary times. Sorata glanced across the ship, bowing her head in thought. Lookout Aluo, helm and repairman Adao, chef Awa. Navigator. He himself is a navigator, and he has read countless books on navigation in the past 10 years, and these books are not for nothing. Although he can't reach Nami's level, he is quite confident in general natural disasters. Besides, his current space domain can already expand to a radius of 20 meters, which is enough for him to fly with a ship. What else? Then his eyes lit up, showing a sudden realization expression. It turns out that there is still a doctor missing. Chapter 11 Promise. The pseudo-Mary, on the forecastle deck. Sorata is staring at the place where the water and the sky meet in the distance. At this time, the sun is the warmest and most dazzling time of the day, and the consistent azure blue has an indescribable clarity. From time to time, you can see a few naughty big fish struggling to jump out of the sea. The splashing water interweaves with the morning sunlight through the hazy mist, shining cool-toned light like transparent sapphire. However, no matter how beautiful the scenery is, it can't attract Sorata's attention now. Creak, creak, creak. There was the sound of planks being squeezed on the ladder. Sorata put down the cup in his hand, turned his head to look at Kuina who was walking up the stairs, and there was a flash of surprise in his eyes. As she finished her morning exercise and just took a shower, Kuina's luminous dark blue hair was as smooth and bright as the sea. Kuina walked up to Sorata, handed over a comb, and said softly, "Sorata, comb my hair." Seeing the love for her in Sorata's eyes, she knew that all her sacrifices were worth it. Ever since she knew Sorata liked kimonos, she has been wearing only kimonos. Knowing that Sorata likes long hair, she has kept it long. Even if the kimono and long hair are not convenient for fighting, she will not hesitate, because she loves Sorata so much. Everything about her has become what Sorata likes. Sorata took the comb, looked at his back squatting in front of him, picked up the comb, and gently combed her soft and silky hair. Of course he knows about Kuina's change, and he can only repay this love with his whole life. After combing the hair, he took the red ribbon on the side, tied Kuina's tail into a ponytail, held her head and looked at it with satisfaction. His technique is not bad. Okay, Kuina. Kuina stood up, turned around, met Sorata's obsessed eyes, and happily turned around in front of him, like a pink butterfly, wantonly showing her beauty. Looking at the woman in front of him who only wanted to show her charm and tenderness to him. Sorata pulled her over and laid her on top of him. Holding her soft delicate body, sniffing the fragrance of bath milk and the unique body fragrance of a girl just out of the bath, she spoke softly and affectionately. Kuina, wait 2 years until you turn 18, and we'll get married. Hearing Sorata's voice, Kuina raised her head suddenly, staring in disbelief at the gentle face close at hand. Tears gushed out like a spring, dripping drop by drop on Sorata's chest. She thought this guy was waiting for her to speak before responding to her love. Sorata looked at Kuina and smiled. The smile was like the ripples of a clear spring, overflowing from the small vortex at the corner of his mouth, rippling all over his face. He stretched out his right hand to wipe her tears, and joked, "Why? Don't you want to?" Kuina nodded quickly. "Yes, I am willing." How could she not want to? Ha 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 ha. Seeing Kuina's lovely appearance, uncontrollable laughter kept coming out of Sorata's mouth. He didn't even have a girlfriend in his previous life, but in this life he has a fiancée at the age of 17. Very carefree, isn't it? Listening to Sorata's laughter, Kuina buried her head in his arms, blushing, and lightly beat him a few times with her hands. Her face was hot, and she quietly listened to Sorata's powerful heartbeat. At this moment, unprecedented peace of mind. Sorata smiled all over his face and looked at Kuina tenderly with his eyes. The two had been together day and night for so many years, and he had indeed always regarded Kuina as his younger sister. But as this younger sister gradually grew up, and became more and more dependent on him, and even fell in love with him later, she was willing to change so much for him. It was impossible for him to remain indifferent. For such a beautiful, beautiful girl, he doesn't believe that anyone can not love. Advertisement. I have to explain here, he is not a lolicon, he is just playing with it. Caressing Kuina's silky long hair, Sorata looked up at the sky with unprecedented firmness in her eyes. This commitment made him more mature and stronger. Sailing is indeed not an easy thing. They have been out at sea for 3 days, and they were quite excited in the first 2 days, and they were very new to everything. However, no matter how beautiful the scenery is, after watching it for 2 days, it will only be boring. Looking around, there is not even a ghost on the sea, except the sea, and the sea. It's no wonder that pirates like to have banquets, they are all boring. Because in the sea, besides exercising, you can only lie down and be a salted fish. Sorata, who is fishing at the bow of the boat, stares blankly at the sea. Isn't it easy to catch fish in the comics? How to get to him, there is nothing. Sure enough, the comics are all lies. Hey, at this time, Kuina was walking over with 2 glasses of Coke, and asked after hearing his sigh. What's wrong? It's been 3 days, and I still haven't seen other ships. Isn't this the age of discovery? Isn't there so many pirates? How come I can't meet him here? Is East Blue too big, or are they, the other pirate ships, just getting lucky? With a frustrated face, he took the Coke that Kuina handed over. Shake a few times. Ding ding ding. The ice cube hit the wall of the glass, and there was a pleasant crisp sound. He raised his cup, raised his head, opened his mouth, and took a big gulp. The iced cola went straight down the esophagus to his stomach. He burped first, and then exhaled a cloud of white air. Cool. Kuina looked at Sorata and smiled slightly. The smile was like a faint ray of light, floating from the corner of her mouth. She reached out to take the cup in Sorata's hand and put it on the coffee table beside her. There's no rush. After all, it's only been 3 days. You should be able to go to the sea restaurant Baratie today. She paused, stuck out her tongue and licked her lips, and then said, I heard that Baratie is a restaurant on the sea, where there is the most powerful chef in East Blue. Little greedy cat. Sorata raised his hand and tapped Kuina on the head lightly. Kuina pretended to be in pain, touched her head with both hands, and stared at Sorata with her big misty eyes. HMPH. Do you dare to say that you don't want to eat? Sorata swallowed her saliva, turned her head to look at the surface of the sea and said stubbornly, I'm only interested in people who can open restaurants in the sea, not where the dishes are made. Sorata nodded affirmatively. Yes, that's right, that's it. Seeing Sorata's falsehood, Kuina didn't point it out, and gently took Sorata's hand and held it in her arms, and accompanied him to fish together. Since she made a marriage contract with Sorata, she has become more gentle and playful. This change made Ahua and the others call Kuina crazy. Because Kuina actually smiled at them, and this was the first time Kuina smiled at them. This made them dare not show their faces for the past 2 days, and always felt that they were about to suffer. What? At this moment, the fishing rod in Sorata's hand suddenly bent, and the fishing line jumped straight. Is this a fish? Advertisement. Kuina quickly let go of Sorata, walked to the side of the boat, lay on the railing, and looked at the sea below the boat. Sorata held the fishing rod with both hands, and with a sudden force, lifted the fishing rod. I saw that the calm sea surface beside the boat suddenly became violently disturbed, and the boat was shaken non-stop by the disturbance of the current. In an instant, the sea surface that went down the fishing line was pushed up, and then, the water curtain fell back to the sea surface under the action of gravity, revealing a huge blue and yellow-black shadow. The front end of the black shadow stands high on the side of the boat, casting a large shadow. With a wide forehead, a wide-open mouth showing sharp fangs, blood-red eyes showing a cold light, fixedly staring at Sorata holding a fishing rod. Standing in the shadows, Sorata looked up at the enlarged moray eel and shouted, It's you, the king of the offshore. Then he dropped the fishing rod, stroked his chin and thought about it, and said solemnly to it. I don't know if you know the one outside the windmill village. That one is really fierce. It can actually bite off the red-haired hand. Although it happened more than 10 years ago, it is enough to boast for a lifetime. Then he stretched out his right hand, raised it in front of him, and gave the king of the sea an encouraging look, and the soul of Zhang broke out. Come on, I'll stick my hand in East Blue too. The king of the sea really couldn't understand what the little guy in front of him was saying, but he seemed to feel the humiliation from the other person's eyes. Its head paused slightly in the air, and then, like a meteorite falling from the sky, it slammed down into the air forcefully. Boom! The king of the near sea felt as if he had hit the steel, staring at him. It took a while for it to recover. Shaking his head, he looked down at the teeth that had fallen on the side of the boat, with an aggrieved expression on his face. It was leisurely shopping with Sister Hayu just now, when a fishhook suddenly got caught in his mouth without its knowing. If you say hook it, then hook it. With his size as the king of the sea, it still doesn't believe who can pull him up. Unexpectedly, before it could swim a few steps, it was pulled up by the guy in front of it. Come on, and break his most handsome tooth. Who should I ask for reason? Sorata, stop playing, at 3 o'clock, I found a boat. Arlo stood on the watchtower, bowed his head and shouted at Sorata. Where? Awa, who was fishing in the kitchen, rushed out with a kitchen knife and lay on the railing of the boat looking forward. They don't care about the king of the sea at all. On the contrary, he is full of curiosity about other ships, especially pirate ships. Okay. A red light flashed in Sorata's eyes, and he sensed it. A big ship really, a much bigger ship than theirs. He raised his head and apologized to the king of the sea, sorry, I can't play with you anymore, so I can only send you on your way. The king near the sea sensed something, his heart tightened, and he shrank his head quickly, wanting to dive into the sea. And 1 second before Sorata finished speaking, there was a sharp and rapid friction sound. Jung. A silver-white slash across the sky, across the neck of the king of the sea, and shot into the sky without exhaustion. Ding. Kuina sheathed the knife. As soon as Sorata finished speaking, she drew the knife. Boom. The huge head of the king of the sea was smashed into the sea water. After several ups and downs, it finally sank into the sea. Through the sparkling sea water, you can still see the unwillingness and grievance in its eyes. And its lower body was still on the surface of the sea, as if it had never felt that its head had disappeared, and the sticky blood with a fishy smell had begun to flow upwards along the smooth incision. When the wind blew, its stubborn lower body could no longer support it, and it fell backwards. Boom. There was a bigger splash than when it came up. Chapter 12 Krieg Pirates. Sea Circle Calendar April 15, 1518. East Blue. A huge sailing ship with a Black Panther-shaped bow and 3 decks is sailing with its back facing the rising sun. On the top of the mast of the ship, there was a dark black skull flag that was blown up by the sea wind. On both sides of the white skull on the flag, there is a red hourglass, which represents the captured prey and the deadline for death, and also represents, you will surrender to me sooner or later, it is only a matter of time. In East Blue, most people should know this flag and this ship. After all, the other party is the group of pirates with the highest bounty offered by East Blue. On the fake melee, Adao held a few reward orders in his hand and explained while staring at the pirate ship in the distance. The Krieg Pirates, the largest pirate group in East Blue, which claims to have 5,000 members. The captain, Admiral Krieg, offers a reward of 17 million berry, known as the Overlord of the East Blue. Captain, Ghost Akin, a reward of 12 million berry. Since there are 5,000 men, why only see one ship? Awa pushed the mirror frame, looked at the reward order in Adao's hand, and asked in doubt. It should be out to inspect various territories, and it's impossible for Krieg to gather all his men together. Isn't this a living target for Marine? Arlo slid down from the mast, walked over quickly, and replied. He looked up at the giant ship rushing towards them and said. This ship should be the main ship that Krieg is on, the Dreadnought Saber. So, Krieg must be on this ship. As they spoke, they all looked at Sorata standing at the bow, waiting for his instructions. They don't worry about the East Blue Overlord, because compared to Sorata, these pirates are vulnerable. After all, Sorata was a monster who was able to draw a tie with the legendary S*******E King 5 years ago. The reward offered by the S*******E King is more than 80 million. When Sorata and the others discovered the Krieg pirates, the other party also discovered them. The opponent turned around and rushed straight towards them. The pirates would never have imagined what a cruel ending they would face. In fact, ignorance is also a kind of happiness, so that they can do whatever they want without any scruples. I don't know if it's luck or misfortune. I don't know if the pirates are lucky or not, but for Sorata and the others, they are lucky. Because I can finally have a little more fun in this boring sailing trip. Seeing the fearless Zonhang saber rushing towards him quickly, Sorata turned around and looked at the three Ahuas with excited faces and shining eyes, with a smirk on his lips. Leave the Krieg to me, the Cadres to Kuina, and the rest to you. Wow. The three of Ahua jumped up excitedly. Having learned swordsmanship for more than 10 years, if they didn't have the heart to be a swordsman and kill the wicked, they wouldn't be able to persist for so long. If it hadn't been for the last few years, there was really no hope, and it was impossible for them to leave the sword hall. Now all they face are heinous people, and there is no psychological burden at all to kill them. Ignoring the excited three, Sorata turned to look at the Krieg pirates, thoughts tumbling in his mind. In fact, in the world of One Piece, most people still have justice in their hearts. The justice here is not the justice of the world government, but the justice of daring to draw a knife when encountering injustice and villains. Even Marine, who has always been called the running dog of the world government, not to mention all, at least more than 90%, is a truly righteous person. Apparently their boat was full of such people. Pirates, on the other hand, are just criminals in the name of their dreams. The sea will bring endless wealth, and some people will accumulate wealth quickly because of luck, courage, strategy or strength. The job of most pirates is to obtain wealth from these people who have accumulated wealth quickly, using a method of robbery. The money comes quickly, and they don't need to spend too much energy. They can take the stolen money and squander it to their heart's content. Advertisement. They are free. They are free. They are even lawless. There are pirates like Luffy who really have dreams. It cannot be said that there are no pirates, but that they are rare. Here are those people with a little bit of ambition and strength, yearning to become such criminals. Most of them, under the instigation and stimulation of others, handed over the most important work in their lives to pirates. Here I have to talk about One Piece, Gul D. Roger. This guy's dying words made those who hesitated, wandered, and even those who had no idea at all rush to the sea. Although there are some people who really want to fight for some big secret treasure, I believe that most of them simply want to be pirates. They don't believe in any great secret treasure. They only believe in bury in front of them, and the wanton life. So just go with the flow. For this alone, Gul D. Roger deserves to die. Not only the world government hates him, the Marines hate him, most of the civilians living on the island hate him even more. Pirates have never been cruel based on their strength. Most of them are villains and scum who bully the weak and fear the hard. And often the more rookie pirates, the more cruel they are. They can't snatch merchant ships with guards and firepower, so they will look at remote villages without marine base. They may just rob at first, but they will turn into murder and arson, and finally they will become massacres. He has read many such newspapers over the years. What? A sudden roar interrupted his churning thoughts. I want to hit 10. Awa took the lead and rushed towards the cabin. Just you. Aluo pursed his lips and hurriedly followed. I want to hit 15. Then I'll have 20. Adao, who followed at the end, looked at the two who were quarreling again speechlessly, helped his forehead and said, then compare, who has more? Compare. Humph. Sorata withdrew his gaze, ignored the three teasers who were going to get their weapons, turned his head to look at Kuina who had been staring ahead, and asked with his right hand on her shoulder. Kuina, are you nervous? I want to become the strongest female swordsman, why would I be nervous? Kuina turned to look at Sorata, a trace of excitement showed on her calm face. He looked at Krieg pirates again with firm eyes, and said. From the moment I went to sea, I left my nervousness in the dojo. Okay. Enjoy the battle. Anyway, the opponent is full of damned people. Even if the opponent can't come, he will not let the opponent go. In the newspaper, he had seen the news of robbing the town on the opposite side more than once. He is not some saint. But for the villains sent before him, he had no choice but to let them all go to hell. Even on the opposite boat, there are some newcomers who have not committed crimes, and people who are not so cruel. But so what? He's not King Luffy, so he doesn't spend energy to identify those who have committed crimes and which ones are not. He is not a police officer. He's not a judge either. He is not Lu Wan. He is just an ordinary person who grew up under the red flag in his previous life. Advertisement. If they had justice in their hearts, they should have left such a pirate group long ago, and those who remained, no matter whether they did or not, at least they wanted to be villains in their hearts. He is just an ordinary person, and he can only treat them equally. At this time, two sailboats, one large and one small, finally met. The dreadnought Saber savagely crossed in front of their boat from diagonally opposite. Yes, compared to the behemoth in front of you, the pseudo-Mary is like a child facing an adult. What, so it's not a merchant ship? The pirates lay on the railing beside the ship, looking down at the little sailboat below, with disappointment on their ferocious faces. When they saw a small boat without a flag at first, they thought it was a merchant ship, so they quickly adjusted their direction and rushed over. This time the harvest is a bit small, just enough to plunder. When they got closer, they realized that the deck of the boat below was empty, only 5 teenagers with long knives hanging from their waists were standing calmly at the bow. They hate ships like this. Because at a glance, you can tell that you are a rookie who has just gone to sea and is a pirate playing house. They have seen a lot of rookies like this, and they have no oil or water at all. So even if they stood at the front, the man and the woman were too handsome and beautiful, but they couldn't attract them at all. After all, they were not slave ships. They only know how to plunder all the various materials they need. Hey, the pirates sighed, put down the rope ladder and prepare to go down the ladder to the boat below. After all, no matter how small the mosquito is, it is still meat. At this moment, there was a sharp and rapid friction sound. Jung. A silver-white slash came from below, slashing towards them very quickly. Careful. The slow-reacting pirate only had time to yell out before being scratched across the neck and froze on the spot. A line of blood first appeared on their necks, and then quickly grew in size. Laugh. The head soared into the sky and fell quickly towards the back. Boom, boom, boom. Among them, the reaction was quick. The pirate who had just retreated to the deck heard the voice behind him and stood stiffly in place. Just then, they felt something roll to their feet. Slowly lowering his head, he looked at the head on the ground with a staring expression and an expression of reluctance. The pirates felt a gust of cold air rushing straight from the soles of their feet to the top of their heads, instantly making their whole bodies icy cold and their scalps numb. They didn't dare to look back. They still knew about the sword hero's flying slash. It was not something they could deal with, only the captain or cadres could fight. They hurriedly ran towards the middle of the deck, yelling in terror as they ran. Enemy attack, enemy attack. What are you making so much noise about? A calm but majestic voice came from the crowd of pirates. The crowd of pirates quickly separated towards the two sides, revealing a passage. A tall figure walked out of the passage, wearing a golden armor, black boots, and a big cloak, with purple hair tied up with a turban, and fierce eyes, making people know that he is the kind of character that is not easy to mess with. He was followed by a thin man in a striped hood, green t-shirt, gray jacket and trousers to his left. On the right is a shield man with a bubble above his head and a round shield all over his body. Looking at the captain and cadres who walked in front of them, those pirate warriors recounted what happened just now. Sword hero. Krieg looked at the headless corpse lying on the side of the boat, and the head rolled aside, his body was full of hostility. The crew who dared to kill him in East Blue really didn't want to live. Chapter 13 The Partner of Justice. Aboard the pseudo-Mary. Seeing the pirate on the opposite side who was about to come down, Kuina made the first move. She would not let these pirates board the fake Mary and fight again. That would not only dirty the ship, but might also damage the ship. Seeing the side of the dreadnought Saber that was emptied in an instant, Sorata jumped on it first. Standing on the railing beside the boat, he took off the wine gourd at his waist with his left hand and took a sip with his head up. He lowered his head and looked inside, just in time for Krieg's gaze. The eyes of the two met, and the corner of Sorata's mouth showed a hint of teasing. Yo. Pirate, I heard you are the overlord of East Blue, right? Come on, show me a dance. You guy, how do you talk to Captain Krieg? Ah Jin, who was on the left of Krieg, came out very blindly and shouted loudly. Okay, do you want to dance too? Sorata frowned and looked at Ajin calmly. Although this guy seems to be pretty good in the anime, he is actually a very cold-blooded and cruel villain. When Ajin looked at Sorata, he felt a great sense of oppression. It made him break out in a cold sweat, and he couldn't open his mouth. At this moment, Krieg took a step forward, breaking the pressure on Ajin. The sense of oppression disappeared, and Ajin quickly took a step back, standing behind Krieg, panting heavily. He raised his head and stared fixedly at Sorata. His eyes were full of horror and his face was solemn. It was too strong for him to be speechless just by his aura. Your Excellency is that swordsman. When East Blue has a character like you, I don't know. I'm not a swordsman, there's someone else playing with you today. Well, there are others. At this time, he turned his gaze to Kuina who had just come up, and he ignored the three Ahua who climbed up behind him, and he only felt threatened by Kuina and Sorata. Kuina looked up at Krieg indifferently, and then ignored him. He was not her target, but her target was the cadre opposite. Then she looked at the Ghost Arkin and Iron Wall Baru who were standing beside Krieg. Ah Jin saw the woman with dark blue hair looking at him. He quickly pulled out the crutches around his waist, and looked at Kuina warily. There is no nonsense. Kuina quickly pulled out a word of peace, stepped on the guardrail with both feet, and shaved his hair. With a sound of whoosh, he arrived in front of Ah Jin in an instant, and quickly drew his sword and slashed. Clang. Too fast. The fast Jin only had time to raise his crutches to block in front of him, then his body lightened uncontrollably, his feet lifted off the ground, and then he was pushed backward by a huge force and shot quickly. Boom. Crashed into the cabin. Ajin in the ruins of the cabin sat up tremblingly with his left hand on the ground and his right hand covering his chest. Cough cough cough. Advertisement. Cough cough cough. He coughed for a while, lowered his head and spat out a mouthful of blood to the side. Looking up at Kuina through the hole created by the impact, he shouted in horror, "Why are you so strong?" Yes, very strong, so strong that if he was hit, he would be seriously injured. Kuina ignored him and turned to look at Baloo with a cold face. Only then did the surrounding pirates react, and suddenly yelled loudly. It's not a dream. The captain will be defeated by this guy. How could it be? That's the ghost agent who offered a reward of 12 million berry. Seeing Kuina's gaze, the pirates around Baloo instantly retreated, leaving a large area. At this time, the three Ahuas beside the boat also drew their swords and rushed towards the surrounding pirates. The cadres can't win, but these ordinary pirates can still fight. 10 years of training is not for nothing, and there is also the swordsmanship taught by Koshiro. Clang clang clang. For a while, the collision of swords and the screams and curses of the pirates can be heard endlessly. Baga roared, "Come on, kill them." Hearing the screams from behind, veins popped out of Krieg's forehead, he didn't look back, and he didn't dare to look back. When the woman came up, the silver-haired boy on the opposite side locked him with arrogance. He felt that as long as he turned around, he would be hit like a storm. Finding that there were no pirates who could threaten the three of Ahua, Sorata withdrew her gaze, turned to look at Krieg and smiled. Yo, Krieg, you have to stay still. You can dance if you feel bored. Ha ha ha. As he spoke, he laughed first. Help. Captain Krieg, get rid of them. You are the strongest person in East Blue. What? Hearing more and more screams, Krieg finally couldn't bear it anymore. I saw him tearing off the cloak on his body, putting the shields on his hands together, and pulling out a long stick. A huge sharp knife appeared at the same time. Appeared, the strongest weapon of the Krieg leader, the big gun. Looking at the pirates who were cheering loudly in front of him, Ahua glanced at Krieg with disdain. Big gun, I also have a machete. That's it. Advertisement. Then he withdrew his gaze and looked at the pirate on the opposite side. Hey, you still have the mind to watch your captain, take care of yourself first. Pirates. As he spoke, he roared and rushed forward. Sorata stared at Krieg with interest. There is a lot of gunpowder and bullets hidden in this guy's armor. Oh yes, there seems to be gas bombs. You guy, you haven't taken me seriously since you got on the boat. Sorata's extreme contempt towards him completely angered him. He scowled, looking up at Sorata menacingly. Why do you think I'm the strongest in East Blue and the one everyone fears? Sorata looked at Krieg and pouted her mouth, and said mockingly, of course it's because of your ugliness and cruelty, can it still be your strength? Krieg raised the big gun with both hands, looked at Sorata angrily, and rushed towards him quickly. Arriving in front of Sorata, he shouted loudly, who do you think Lousy is? Lousy is East Blue Admiral Krieg, the strongest man in East Blue who offers a reward of 17 million berry. Then he slashed hard at the top of Sorata's head. Go to hell. Boom. There was an explosion, followed by a puff of thick smoke, which quickly enveloped Sorata. Well done, Captain Krieg. Get rid of them. These guys even ignored the sword light around them, and applauded Krieg loudly. But in the following scene, as if a gust of cold wind had blown by, they were all frozen in place from head to toe. A gust of sea breeze blew past, and the smoke dispersed, and I saw Sorata holding the big gun firmly in his right hand, standing on the spot unscathed. Hey, just kidding. How could someone take Captain Krieg's big gun and still be unscathed? Impossible, impossible, this must be a dream. They kept shaking their heads. The body retreated involuntarily to the rear. Then they suddenly looked up at Sorata and shouted. Hey, who the hell are you guys? I'm just an ordinary person. Sorata held a big gun in his right hand and a wine gourd in his left hand and waved towards them. Then he withdrew his left hand and took a sip of the wine, turned his head to stare at them, and said solemnly. Okay, if you want to give me an identity, I think it should be a partner of justice. Advertisement Chapter 14 The Destruction of the Krieg Pirates. Awa and the others ignored this, and kept killing with knives. Looking at the silver-haired boy opposite, Krieg broke out in a cold sweat. He knew the weight of his gun, which was more than 2,000 caddies. Not only did the opponent receive his slash, but he also received it in such a light and descriptive way. Suddenly an unparalleled force came from the barrel of the gun in his hand, and he let go of his hand quickly. As soon as Sorata exerted force, he pulled the big gun over, lifted it up, and threw the big gun aside like throwing garbage. Boom. The big gun punched a hole in the deck and fell through. Sorata ignored Krieg and looked at Kuina. Kuina is now fighting with Ajin and Baloo. Oh, this can't be called a fight, it should be a one-sided crush. If it weren't for Baloo's defense, the two of them would have lost if they met face to face. Ajin was lying on the back of Palu, motionless. But from his slightly rising and falling chest, he could still tell that he was still alive. On his chest, there was a knife wound that cut horizontally across his entire body, and blood was pouring out fiercely. The blood flowed through his body and dripped onto the deck, staining a large area red. With this amount of bleeding, if there is no treatment, I believe it will not be long before there will be an extra corpse here. Kuina looked at the man with the shield on the opposite side. This guy had really amazing defense, and he was able to defend against his slash, even though it was just a normal slash. She turned her head and looked around, and found that there were still many pirates. And more pirates are constantly rushing out of the cabin, and looking at the three guys, ahua, they have been surrounded by pirates. Judging by the way they are leaning against each other, their physical strength should not be exhausted in a long time. After all, they are not sword masters, they cannot attack in groups, they can only chop one by one. Withdrawing her gaze, Kuina's cold and calm face became more serious, and she looked up at Baloo. To hurt this guy, you have to cut through his thick shield first. Kuina slowly sheathed the knife. Lean forward, take a small step back with your right foot, bend your left leg, and firmly hold the handle of the knife with your right hand. A puff of pale black gas gradually wrapped around the knife along the right hand. She raised her head and stared at Baloo indifferently, as if staring at a dead person. Whoosh! Only a knife light could be seen across Baloo. Kuina disappeared instantly, and suddenly appeared behind Baloo, acting as if she had never moved before. Ding! This is the sound of a knife being sheathed. Slash all things with one blow. Kuina stood up and walked towards Sorata without looking at Baloo again. Baloo just stood there, motionless, until Kuina walked past him, bringing up a faint wind, which broke his calm. What? He suddenly screamed and fell backwards. I saw the shield on his chest suddenly split from the middle and scratched towards the two sides. All that could be seen through the shield was a long, narrow knife wound that nearly cut him in half. Puff! Blood spurted out along the knife wound like a waterfall. Baloo fell back on the deck with a bang, and fell unconscious, probably dying. Advertisement. Master Baloo. The pirates around screamed in unison. Hearing the noise behind him, Krieg knew he couldn't wait any longer, he had to find a way to escape, the silver hair on the opposite side was too terrifying. Watching Kuina passing by, the armor on his arm quietly turned into a cannon barrel. With a gas mask on his face, he lifted the cannon barrel on the back of his hand, and aimed a cannon at Kuina's back. Toxic gas bomb. H.5. Boom. A large red cannonball was fired at Kuina. At this moment, the whole world suddenly became still, followed by a strong mental oppression, sweeping across the entire dreadnought saber in an instant. Krieg, who was about to turn around and run away, suddenly widened his eyes and saw that his shell was hovering behind Kuina, and it didn't explode as he imagined. And he himself was squeezed in the middle by the infinite pressure around him, unable to move. He struggled crazily and even wanted to beg for mercy, but it was useless, he couldn't even open his mouth now. The three of Ahua, who were fighting with the pirates, suddenly stopped. Then I saw the pirates around, one after another rolled their eyes and collapsed to the ground. The pressure came and went quickly. Let them all breathe a sigh of relief, and then collapsed on the ground. This kind of mental oppression, they felt that if they had a few more seconds, they would have to fall down. Don't know what it is though. But what is certain is that this must be another ability of Sorata. They looked up to Sorata. I saw Sorata staring at Krieg blankly, and behind Kuina in front of him, a red cannonball was hovering. Don't think about it, this must be Krieg the B************ D who sneaked up on Kuina and made Sorata angry. Only then did he use this incredible ability to stun all the pirates on the ship. This made them silently mourn for Krieg in their hearts. This guy is really looking for death. Kuina is Sorata's reverse scale. Sorata hung the wine gourd back to her waist and jumped off the guardrail. Walk up to Kuina, stretch out your right hand, clasp your middle finger with your thumb, and lightly hit the shell behind Kuina. Whoosh! I saw the cannonballs fired towards the distance at an extremely fast speed. Then it exploded on the sea surface with a bang, emitting a burst of pink poisonous smoke. You can't let this thing explode here. It doesn't matter to the pirates, just don't hurt Kuina and the others. Looking at Sorata, Kuina's mouth twitched into a smile. With Sorata here, she doesn't worry about sneak attacks or anything. Normally, she would be able to dodge the cannonball, but when she got to Sorata's side, she felt a little relaxed. Sorata, I'm fine. She turned around, took Sorata's hand and looked at Krieg. Sorata turned to look at Kuina beside her, stretched out her hand and scratched her nose, and said. I don't know how to hide, just trust me. Of course, I'm sure Sorata won't hurt me. There was a smile on Kuina's mouth, eyes narrowed into crescents. Advertisement. Oh, by the way, what do you want to do with this guy? Whatever. Kuina shrugged indifferently. Well, anyway, I didn't intend to keep him. Sorata looked at Krieg and suddenly increased the pressure in the field. Then go to hell. Krieg, who was pinned in place and unable to move, suddenly struggled more violently, and a greater pressure came from all around, squeezing him frantically into the middle. Blood was pouring from his mouth, eyes, and ears. His bones made a creaking sound due to squeezing. After waiting for a while, he gradually became still. There was only a huge blood cell wrapped in a metal ball left in place. Since you like armor so much, then use the armor as a coffin for him. Boom. As soon as Sorata had a thought, he pushed the blood cell down the deck. He wouldn't touch this disgusting thing with his hands. The blood cells shot quickly across the deck, through the cabin, and then through the floor, before disappearing into the sea. Then Sorata raised his head and his eyes flashed red. Observation haki swept across the entire dreadnought saber in an instant. Except for them, there was no standing pirate. Without hesitation, Conqueror's haki really deserves to be a pretend weapon, and also has the title of Harvester of Miscellaneous Soldiers. This thing was his spiritual breakthrough 2 years ago, and he naturally awakened it. It should be related to his upgraded spirit, and it may also be related to his self-confidence. After all, in this world, no one should be able to kill him. Unless it's some miraculous power he doesn't know about. Hey, can you three still move? Sorata looked at the 3 guys sitting among the pirates and shouted. Don't worry, I can still hit 10 more. Awa hurriedly jumped up and raised his hands and shouted. Just you, I don't know who it was just now, almost got hacked. Aluo stood up, patted the dust on his buttocks, and taunted Awa. UB ********* D. He was indeed almost attacked by a pirate just now, and it was Arlo who saved him from being injured. Adao who was next to them gave them a helpless look, took out a cigarette and lit it. These 2 guys were still fighting side by side, and now they are starting to quarrel again. Okay, let's go and see the spoils first. After speaking, Sorata turned around and headed towards the 2nd floor of the cabin, the captain's cabin. Squeak. Pushing open the old wooden door in front of you, you can see the randomly placed treasures in the room, and the pile of berry. The ones in front of me should have been snatched by the Krieg pirates on this trip. It seems that there is no rush to deal with it. You can see that there is freshly dried dark red bloodline on some berry. Sorata glanced at the room lightly, but found nothing special, and immediately lost interest. Clean up your things and move them back. He turned around, said something to Iowa and the others, and then pulled Kuina back to the fake Mary. Chapter 15 The Heartlessness of the Sea. Staring at the dreadnought battleship saber in front of him. Sorata drew his sword, and slashed at it casually. A huge crescent-shaped silver gray slash quickly slashed past the dreadnought saber. Boom boom boom. The dreadnought saber suddenly split in half from the middle, and seawater poured into the cabin fiercely from the break, causing the giant ship to slowly sink into the sea. A wave hit, and the dreadnought battleship saber, which was broken in 2, slowly drifted towards the 2 sides. In front of the pseudo-Mary, make way for a passage. Sorata put away the knife, lay back on the reclining chair behind her, took the juice on the coffee table with her left hand, shook it gently, raised it to her lips and took a sip. Then he raised his right hand and shouted to the front. Okay, friends, Yongfan set sail. The 3 of Ahua standing under the mast became busy in an instant. Arlo, who climbed onto the mast, pulled out the sail vigorously, and the strong wind blew, and the sail quickly swelled, and the pseudo-Mary accelerated and rushed through the middle of the dreadnought saber that was split in 2. Sorata glanced indifferently at the pirates in the broken ship on both sides, and didn't pay much attention to it. If these pirates are lucky enough to wake up in time. The lucky ones survived in the sea without boats and food. Then he is really the son of the plane. Not everyone is a protagonist like Wong Luffy. As a demon fruit power, I was driving a small boat. I can't say a boat. A small boat went out to sea. Not long after I went out to sea, the boat capsized as expected. I finally hid in a wine barrel and floated on the sea for a few days. Die at sea. Really, the halo of the protagonist. Pseudo-Mary. On the front deck, Sorata was lying on a recliner under a blanket, reading today's newspaper. Except for some trivial matters, the newspapers are full of news about pirate robberies. Since the beginning of the Age of Great Voyages, these news have been published every day, and he is tired of reading them. Don't look at the era of great voyages that has passed for more than 10 years, but recently more and more pirates have gone to sea. These pirates should be the younger generation who grew up listening to the stories of One Piece. They all want to find some great secret treasure, but don't even think about whether they can find it. In 2 years, the protagonists of this world will set sail, and the big secret treasure is waiting for them. Flipping through the pages, he was stunned for a moment, and saw the headline on this page of the newspaper: another island fell from the sky, mercilessly destroying the towns on the island. Close black lens bracket. Below the headline is the report and a picture. The report reads: the night before yesterday, suddenly an island fell from the sky and landed hard on Cordy Island, destroying the entire town on the island. The tremors were felt on other nearby islands. Fortunately, no tsunami was caused. Below the report was a photo that took up half the newspaper. Advertisement. In the photo is a Cordy-shaped island full of ruins. You can see that in the middle of the island, there is an island one size smaller than the Cordy Island. It can be seen from the dilapidated buildings around that in the past, there should be a town on it. However, most of the current towns have been deeply buried under the small island. It's unlucky to be buried by a small island. This world is so incredible, there are all kinds of anecdotes. Sorata shook her head. Islands. Hearing Sorata's muttering, Kuina sat up on the couch next to her. She stretched out her hand in front of Sorata, and said with interest, "Show me, Sorata." "No, take it." Sorata handed the page to Kuina, muttering with exclamation. The sea is so magical. One second they might be eating hot pot and singing, and the next second they will be buried by an island falling from the sky. They don't know who to turn to for reasoning. Kuina took the newspaper and read it. Looking at her, she seemed to think of something, and lowered her head in thought. What's wrong? Sensing Kuina's state, Sorata asked softly. I seem to have seen a similar picture somewhere. Have you seen it? Yeah, I've seen it. Kuina looked up suddenly, with a suddenly realized expression. Oh, I remembered. Sorata sat up straight, with curiosity in her eyes. She stared at Kuina and asked, what do you remember? I seem to have seen similar news 10 years ago. She paused and continued. One time, the newspaper that my father brought back from the sea contained news similar to this one. The same island that fell from the sky, the same destroyed everything. She looked up at Sorata, frowning slightly, feeling a little depressed. At that time, it seemed that you had just arrived. Oh, so it was 10 years ago. Sorata nodded, he hadn't gotten into the habit of reading newspapers then. No wonder, I don't know. He put down the newspaper and sighed silently, raising his hand to smooth Kuina's brow. Hey, there is nothing to do about this kind of natural disaster. I hope people are okay. He also knew that it was impossible to be fine, but he still prayed in his heart. The sea is so unreasonable that even here in East Blue, natural disasters are inevitable. Advertisement. Maybe this small island was washed up into the sky by the current there, and then just fell on Cordy Island. That's it for East Blue, let alone Grand Line, where the weather and environment are unreasonable. Many pirates and merchant ships that rushed into the Grand Line were not necessarily killed by the enemy. Most of them were left on the bottom of the sea forever by the strange weather of the sea and the ferocious Sea King's monsters. Sorata shook her head, dismissing those thoughts. Looking up at Kuina, okay, frowning often will cause wrinkles in advance. How is it possible? I'm only 16, and I'm as beautiful as a flower. It's too early to get wrinkles. As soon as he opened Sorata's hand, a smile appeared on Kuina's downcast face. It's you, Sorata, you are 1 year older than me, you should have wrinkles first, and you will be an uncle by then. I'm an uncle, so you are an aunt. Also, haven't you heard a word? What words? The bigger the man, the more tasteful he is, and both lowly and girls love uncle. Sorata looked at Kuina's improved mood and said solemnly. Ha ha ha. Kuina laughed happily. Sorata's eyes flashed with tenderness, staring at the laughing Kuina, the corners of her mouth gradually turned up, and a gentle smile appeared on her face. These things have nothing to do with them. No matter how great a natural disaster is, no matter how ferocious a monster, it is impossible for them to stop. Sorata, there is a huge ship ahead, it should be the arrival of the sea restaurant Baratie. At this moment, Arlo's shout suddenly came from the air. Hearing the sound, Sorata gently put down the cup on her left hand, lifted the blanket on her body, put on her slippers, and stood up. He walked to the bow of the boat and looked at the place where the water and the sky connected. The midday sun makes the water surface in the distance look as hazy as the water vapor in a steamer. Through the distorted gas, what can be seen in sight is a huge fish-like ship. There are 3-story buildings above the deck of the ship, and the outside of the building is painted with blue paint. From a distance, it looks like a big herring. The sails on the huge mast on the ship did not open, and a flag with a red frame, white background and black characters was flying on the top, with the capital BT 2 English letters printed on the flag. I don't know what these 2 letters mean, I always feel like I'm swearing. It seems that they should have stopped operating in this sea area recently. When I got closer, I could see the huge ship parked behind it, a white military aircraft, and more than 10 small sailboats, large and small. These small sailboats should be passing merchant ships. Parking the Pseudo Mary next to the Junhang, they furled the sails and lowered the anchor. Looking up at the military aircraft next to it, you can see the sailors resting on it. The sailor just glanced at them lightly and didn't pay much attention to them, it's fine if they're not pirates anyway. Since Baratie could not land directly, he had to approach by boat. They had no choice but to put down the spare boat and row towards the sea restaurant. Chapter 16 The Customer is God. Sea Restaurant Baratie. It is said to be the most famous restaurant in East Blue. Many people come here specially to taste the delicious dishes made by the owner and chef Zapu. Even the important characters of Marine will come here to eat. Come here, no matter you are a Marine or a pirate. It doesn't matter if you are a nobleman or a commoner. As long as you come hungry, they will fill you up. Squeak. The slightly muffled screeching of the old heavy wooden doors of Baratie drowned out the soothing music from the dining room. Sorata pushed open the door of the restaurant and entered the restaurant first, followed by Kuina and Ahua. People who were dining in the restaurant, Chi-Chi looked up at the door, and then didn't pay much attention. It wasn't until then that the soothing and elegant music in the restaurant, the clash of cups, knives and forks, and the sound of people talking in low voices all came rushing towards us. Welcome. As soon as Sorata and the others walked into the restaurant, there was a guy with a pink scarf and a vicious look, who looked like Popeye, who appeared out of nowhere. He stood in front of them, bent over, rubbed his hands, and looked at them with a big smile on his face. Patty noticed Sorata the moment they walked in, so he rushed to welcome them in front of Sorata at his usual fastest speed. The main reason is that these guests look like rich people, and he likes to greet rich people the most. He likes the generosity of the rich, and hates the poor. Sorata looked at Patty standing in front of him, a smile flashed in his eyes, and he said politely. I heard that this place has the best food in East Blue, so we came here to try it today. Could I trouble you to introduce me? Patty looked at Sorata with a sunny face, and was taken aback for a moment. He hasn't met such a polite guest for a long time. This is a restaurant on the sea, and the main external guests are pirates. You can't expect politeness from pirates. When he came back to his senses, the professional smile on his face showed a trace of sincerity, and he smiled at Sorata. Master, please go inside first, and let me introduce you in detail later. This guy was originally a ferocious pirate, and then he went to the sea restaurant Redfoot Zapu to become a chef, and now he is the chef and combatant of the sea restaurant Baratie. So he would call everyone uncle. Paddy rolled his eyes to see the number of Sorata and the others, then turned around and shouted to the kitchen. 5 customers enter the store. Then he bent slightly, pointed to an empty seat by the window with his right hand, and motioned for Sorata and the others to follow. 5 gentlemen, this way please, the sea restaurant Baratie will do its best to serve you. Paddy walked to the round table first, and helped Sorata and the others pull out the chairs. After watching them take their seats, he took the cup and lemonade from another chef behind him and poured them one by one. Advertisement. Then he took a step back, stood aside, and said enthusiastically to Sorata. Master, please have tea first. Well, tell me about the dishes. Sorata picked up the glass and took a sip of the lemonade, which was sweet and sour, not bad. Paddy took out the notebook and pen from the ring and introduced. 5 uncles, our restaurant has different dishes every day, which mainly depends on what kind of ingredients can be received that day. Today we have the largest abalone and sea cucumber in East Blue, and the unique saury in the Kingdom of Columbia. He paused and then spoke. However, the best ingredients today are not these, but a batch of sea fish and lobster from the Grand Line. Paddy looked at Sorata's longing eyes, the light of money flashed in his eyes, and the smile on his face became even brighter. How about it, do you want to try it? He said this to every rich guest. The ingredients are indeed good ingredients, just a little bit expensive. Only the rich can afford this kind of ingredients. As for the poor, they don't even deserve lemonade. Paddy is so realistic. Ahua has been very excited since entering Baratie, and finally couldn't help it now. He asked Paddy loudly. Don't worry about the ingredients, can you let Mr. Zapu, the store manager and chef, cook for us? Zapu was a famous chef more than 10 years ago. Later, after opening Baratie, he became the most famous chef in East Blue. Awa is also a chef, of course he knows Zapu, he has heard Zapu's name more than once from his father. Although his career as a chef is only about 2 years old, he is very hydrated. But this didn't affect him, he wanted to really see how delicious the dishes made by the most powerful chef in East Blue were. It is better to work hard in that direction in the future. Although he, Ahua, is a salted fish, he still values the profession of chef very much. No problem, sir, the customer is God, don't let the head chef cook for you, it's okay to let me dance for you. It's just. Sorata looked at Paddy who was standing beside him rubbing his hands with a fawning face, and smiled. Although this guy looks ferocious, the actions he makes seem a little cute. He joked and said, you need to pay more, right? Yes, it is. Paddy wasn't embarrassed at all, after all, the prices of dishes made by the chef and ordinary chefs must be different. As for his own service fee, of course the more the better. Okay, go and order all the best dishes in your store today. Sorata waved at him, showing hands covered in gold rings. These things were all picked up on Krieg's boat. Not only did he wear gold rings all over his hands, but he also had several large gold chains around his neck. And he also made the 3 of Ahua wear the same ring and necklace. Advertisement. Otherwise, why do you think Paddy is so enthusiastic? Understood, sir, I'm going to ask the head chef to cook for you. In Paddy's heart, customers are God, and rich customers are God's God. Facing this kind of customers who look like they are not bad for money and are full of nouveau riche, he has to use 10,000% enthusiasm to earn as much as possible of the berry in their pockets. Hollow down pointing triangle, cut, isn't he an upstart? Marine at the table next to him couldn't stand it anymore. This big guy didn't have the same attitude when facing them. Didn't you say that the customer is God? You guys treat God differently. Gentlemen, please wait for a while, I'll go over and deal with it and I'll be back. Paddy turned around and immediately straightened his back, the smile on his face disappeared in an instant. He walked slowly in front of those Marines, twitched the corners of his mouth, revealed a professional smirk, and said lightly. These guests, please don't make any noise, you are disturbing my distinguished guests. There are also levels of guests, and these Marines are typical poor ghosts in his heart, he doesn't care who they are, there are only 3 kinds of people in his eyes. The first type is people who have no money at all. This kind of people can't afford to eat, and they are also the people he hates the most. The second type is poor ghosts. Poor ghosts can afford food but can only eat ordinary bread and fish soup. He also greets such people, but he cannot be too enthusiastic. The third type is rich people who eat whatever they want. This kind of person is God in his eyes. In fact, there is another kind of people like Sorata, they are God among gods. You guy, your attitude is too obvious. Have it. Paddy spoke perfunctorily. Why not? Everyone can see the fake smile you showed us, and now you are even more impatient. Why, we just don't welcome you. Oh, is there? Then the corners of Paddy's mouth continued to widen, and he asked them with a smile that was uglier than crying. Are the guests satisfied now? Satisfied, satisfied, you are more perfunctory than before. The Marines stood up together and yelled at Paddy. Looking at Marine on the opposite side, Patty put away his smile, and with a fierce expression on his face, he spoke again. Several guests, can you please stop making loud noises? He was a pirate before, so he wouldn't be used to these Marines, especially Marines with no money. What, do you guys still want to hit us? Seeing that Patty dared to show a fierce expression, the Marines shouted even louder. Whether their guns are not working well, or the skin on their bodies is useless, any waiter dares to show malice to them. They don't know about Patty's past. After all, Patty was just a scumbag pirate who didn't even offer a bounty. Chapter 17 Inches Redfoot, Zap. The voice from their side not only attracted the attention of the entire restaurant. It even attracted Zapu upstairs and Sanji in the kitchen. Okay, Patty, are you trying to break the tables and chairs in the shop again? At this time, a deep and old voice came from upstairs, which attracted everyone's attention. Then an old man came down the stairs. The old man was wearing a chef's uniform and a very tall chef's hat, and his golden beard was tied into 2 long braids, which fell on both sides of his lips. The old man wore a wooden prosthesis on his right leg, and he stepped on the wooden floor and made a boom, boom, boom sound. Looking at the old man walking over, those Marines who were making loud noises just now didn't dare to say anything. They were not afraid of this Popeye-like guy, but they were afraid of the old man in front of them. Ordinary people don't know this old guy's past, how can they Marine not know? This old man was the captain of the famous chef pirates in East Blue more than 10 years ago. It is rumored that he has very superb leg skills. Because he kicked his opponent's blood splattered 5 feet, and his own feet were also stained red with blood, he was called Redfoot, Zapu. Although he is no longer a pirate, Yue is still there, who knows if he will suddenly go crazy and give them a sudden kick. Walking in front of Marine, Zapu first kicked Patty with his prosthetic leg, looked at him and said, "What are you doing in a daze, and you still don't process the ingredients? It's rude to make customers wait so long." Patty pursed his lips, evidently not afraid of Zap. He turned and walked quickly towards Sorata's table. Arriving in front of Sorata, this guy had a ferocious expression at first, and then, like a face-changing master, he quickly covered himself with a smile, blooming like a chrysanthemum. He arched his body, rubbed his hands next to his head, and said flatteringly, "Sir, do you have any orders?" In the restaurant, Kakuzu twitched everyone's mouths, and there was a collective silence. "You are too obvious." Sorata twitched the corners of her mouth, and looked at Patty speechlessly. "This guy is really top-notch. Don't get so close to me, you can see your long nose hair, it's really disgusting, hurry up and cook." Understood the guest, your request is my greatest purpose. He took a few steps back slowly, turned around, straightened his bent waist, quickly put away the smile on his face, and walked into the back kitchen. Seeing that the other guests in the restaurant were not busy watching, they slowly returned to their original state. What? That's it. Some of them heard that the chef here likes to fight with pirates and guests, so they came here to watch the excitement. Zapu looked at the Marine standing upright in front of him, and said lightly, "Go and call your Captain Rust over for dinner. We are also old friends, and that guy is the first to come in every time he comes here. Oh, by the way, I haven't seen you before, are you new to the ship?" "Yes, Mr. Zap." One of the Marines looked at Zapu cautiously and said, "If Mr. Zapu is fine, then we will call our captain." "Go go." Zap waved at them. The Marines breathed a sigh of relief, turned around and ran out of the restaurant. Zapu dealt with this problem very easily. Advertisement. Sorata exaggeratedly said to him, "Hey. He is indeed a man with a title, so majestic. This guest, I'm not a dignified person, I'm just an ordinary restaurant owner." Zapu walked to Sorata's table, stood beside Sorata, and said calmly, "Well, no matter who you are, can I trouble you to cook faster?" Sorata shrugged nonchalantly. "Okay, please wait a moment, guests. After all, no matter how fast you cook, it takes time to cook." Snapped. Sorata took out a stack of berry from her arms, and threw it on the table casually. "What about now?" Zap's mouth twitched, he felt that Sorata was humiliating him. "Guest, no matter how fast it is, it will take half an hour." "What about now?" Snapped. "Same action, same money." Zapu's indifferent expression gradually showed a smile, and his waist was slightly bent. "If it's humiliating like that, then please step it up. Guest, I can only arrive 20 minutes earlier, I can't go any faster, or my old bones will fall apart." Snapped. This time it was a big pile, at least there were 7 or 8 stacks. "Now what?" Sorata looked amusedly at Zapu, whose face changed greatly, and the smile on his face became even brighter. This kind of gameplay of throwing money at people is still very cool. Anyway, the money was picked up. Yes, it was picked up. There are so many pirates on the sea, they are all waiting for them to pick up money. From the moment he went to sea, he was no longer the person who had to borrow money to build a ship. From now on, please call him Kong, the richest man. He has already booked Barry on all the pirate ships that he can meet in the future. Zapu looked at Barry on the table, his expression finally lost his composure, and he gradually bent over, with a stiff smile on his face, rubbing his hands and looking at Sorata. "Guest, I assure you, 5 minutes, as long as 5 minutes, I will definitely cook the dishes." It's not that he doesn't talk about principles, but that the other party gave too much. Sorata opened his mouth and let out a big laugh when he saw that Zapu was very much like what Patty did just now. Ha ha ha. The three Ahua who had been watching the performance of Sorata and Zapu also laughed. They couldn't take it anymore. They laughed and slapped the table, making a bang 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 sound. And Kuina covered her mouth, her shoulders twitched wildly, and she laughed like a silver bell. Advertisement. Zapu stood up straight, smiling and looking at the five laughing wildly. He had already seen that Sorata was joking with him, so he played along with him. Otherwise, do you think that he is really doing it for the money on the table? Seeing that Sorata and the others had laughed enough, Zapu asked, "Boy, you don't look like pirates in your clothes. Are you planning to go there for fun, or are you really planning to take an adventure?" "Of course it's an adventure, we plan to go around the Grand Line," Ahua excitedly said to Kaido. Sorata told them from the time they went to see that this was their goal. Grand Line, I really miss that kind of place. A nostalgic look appeared on Zapp's face. Awa and the others only know that Zapu is a chef, they don't know that he used to be a pirate, and they are not Sorata or Marine. "Oh, look at Mr. Zapu, have you been to the Grand Line?" Ahua pushed his glasses and asked with interest. Zapu smiled and recalled. "Well, I used to have a dream, so I found a group of like-minded partners and went to Grand Line." He paused for a moment, his face gradually became serious, looked at Sorata and the others and continued, "We sailed on the Grand Line for only 1 year, and the whole army was wiped out. If it wasn't for the good-hearted ships, I wouldn't even be able to come back." "Then what happened later? How did you come up with the idea of opening a restaurant on the sea?" Arlo put his hands on the table and looked at Zapu and asked in doubt. Hearing a Luo ask a question, Awa and a Dao also nodded, looking at Japu curiously. They don't care about the dangers of those Grand Lines. After all, they haven't experienced it and can't empathize with it. Besides, they still have Sorata's invincible strength. They are interested in what motivates a person to open a restaurant on the sea. Presumably, I have experienced a lot of interesting things, so I have such an idea. Facing the curious gazes of the three of Shangahua, Zapu's eyes flickered with fear. He pulled out his chair, sat next to Sorata, and slowly and lightly told his tragic experience of being shipwrecked and stranded on a deserted island. As for his legs and Sanji, he didn't say much. After listening to Zapu's experience, Ahua pushed down the frame of the mirror, and his eyes flashed. So, Mr. Zapu has tried the ultimate hunger, so in order to let people who go to sea have a place to eat when they are hungry, did he come up with the idea of opening a restaurant at sea? Yes. Hearing Zapu's short and positive answer, they all showed admiration. What a great and noble idea for a cook. Zapu looked at the boys on the opposite side, he was only interested in Baratie, but he was indifferent to the danger of the Grand Line, and he kindly reminded him. "Boys, I advise you to get ready before setting off. After all, the danger of the Grand Line is not comparable to that of the world. All the vicious pirates of the world gather there." "Pirates." A Dao shrugged indifferently, took out the cigarette case, handed it to Zapu, and said with a smile. "Mr. Zapp, would you like one?" Zapu looked at a Dao, quickly waved his hands, and explained to them. "I never touch these things with my hands, for fear of contaminating the food." Seeing that Zapu was not pretending to be fake, a Dao took back the cigarette case, took out one by herself, lit it, and started smoking. Seeing that Sorata and the others didn't take pirates seriously, Zeff continued with a serious tone. "Pirates are easy to talk about, and they may escape. If you are unlucky and encounter horrible weather at the natural disaster level, then congratulations, maybe the whole army will be wiped out. As for me, I encountered a natural disaster and was wiped out by the entire army." Chapter 18 Inches The sexy cook, Sanji. Looking at Zepp who reminded them seriously, Sorata put away her smile and said to him. "Well, take it easy, Mr. Zapp. Me, but I waited for more than 10 years to go to sea, how could I not be ready?" Then there was a trace of terror on his body, and he said solemnly to Zapu. "In order to get the title of the strongest, and to see the strange beauty of the Grand Line, I went to sea specially." Awa and the three of them also nodded. Even though they were just there to make soy sauce, it didn't affect their search for pictures. "And me, I went to sea to become the strongest female swordsman and follow in Sorata's footsteps." Kuina, who was sitting on Sorata's left, spoke with firm eyes. Feeling the momentum and will of Sorata, Zapu couldn't help but lament the power of dreams, which is really great. At the beginning, he went to sea just to find the legendary Albi. Thinking of this, he couldn't help thinking of Sanji who had the same dream as him. This guy has been refusing to go to sea to pursue his dream because of him. As soon as I thought of Sanji, this guy Sanji appeared. A black figure suddenly rushed out of the kitchen, past Sorata, and stood directly beside Kuina. Then the guy faced Kuina, knelt down on one knee, put his left hand on his chest, raised a red rose with his right hand, and said loudly to Kuina. "Ah, the sea. Thank you for giving me the meeting today." Looking at the guy in front of him, wearing a black suit, blonde hair, and a rather unique curly eyebrow. Kuina was surprised for a moment, then watched him perform blankly. Seeing Kuina's more indifferent face, Sanji covered his face with more excitement and said loudly. "Ah, love, just laugh at me for not being able to bear this pain. As long as I can be with you, no matter if I become a pirate or a demon, I have made up my mind now." The trio of Sorata and Ahua twitched their mouths. Sorata was surprised and speechless at the sudden appearance of Sanji, the S*X cook, and the guy's exaggerated action language. The three of Awa simply mourned for this guy. It's really courting death. Sure enough, their conjecture was verified next. Kuina felt goosebumps all over her body. She stood up abruptly, raised her leg, pointed at the guy's head, and kicked it sideways. Boom. Sanji tilted his head and quickly shot towards the ground. Boom. His head hit the ground heavily. The guy got kicked and was lying on the ground, looking up at Kuina with his eyes bulging. Ah, goddess. Kicking people is so beautiful. Kuina was really disgusted by this guy, and quickly ran behind Sorata, hugged him and said coquettishly. Sorata, this guy is too disgusting. Sorata stared at Sanji with a dark face. This guy is really not as famous as meeting him, but he is so daring. Advertisement. Hey, who are you? Stay away from my goddess. Sanji noticed Kuina lying on Sorata's back, and then he noticed Sorata. After seeing Sorata's appearance clearly, the alarm bells in his heart rang loudly. He thinks he is that kind of handsome person, but compared to Sorata, he is nothing. Sanji wiped off the bloodline from the corner of his mouth, and stood up like a normal person. He stared intently at Sorata, his eyes wide open, waiting for his answer. It's your goddess fiancé, who do you think I am? Sorata looked at Sanji and replied indifferently. No matter who it is, when your fiancé is harassed by a pervert, he must not be in such a good mood. Even if you know that this pervert has no bad intentions, he is just pure lust. However, it didn't affect him. The first time he and Sorata met, Sorata had a hint of disgust towards him. Oh, so it's my fiancé. This guy's reaction rate is a bit slow. Then he reacted, staring at Sorata and asking in surprise. What did you say? I said that I am your goddess fiancé, isn't that clear enough? Sorata looked at Sanji speechlessly. Sanji froze for a moment, his face quickly darkened, and he lowered his head and muttered. Hey, love, you came so suddenly, and then you left in such a hurry, it was over before it even started. Then the guy calmly took out his cigarette, lit it and took a puff. He is lecherous, but not obscene, and he can't do the thing of pursuing someone else's fiancé. Okay. That's when he noticed Zeff standing next to Sorata with a gloomy face. He calmly shouted, Hey, old man, you are not resting upstairs, when did you come down? This is my restaurant, can't I come down? It's you guy, you are too rude when facing guests. As he said that, Zeppu quickly walked in front of Sanji, raised his prosthetic leg high, and quickly kicked Sanji. Boom. This time it was the sound of wood hitting the head. Boom. Sanji lay on the ground again. Lying on the ground, Sanji touched his head with his hand, raised his head and looked at Zeppu angrily and shouted. Hey, old man, I'm the sous chef here. Can't you save me some face? Zeppu stared at Sanji calmly and said lightly, You guy not only easily conflicts with customers, but also runs to flatter you whenever you see a woman, and you can't cook any delicious food. He paused, but still didn't say the next thing. He originally wanted Sanji to go to sea with Sorata and the others. Advertisement. From the conversation just now, he could feel the will of Sorata and the others, and Sanji didn't conflict with their dreams, on the contrary they fit well. But when he saw Sorata and Kuina, he didn't seem to be so friendly to Sanji, and there was even a trace of disgust. That also gave up the idea of letting Sanji and Sorata go to sea. After all, dreams are very important, but it is even more important to find a partner who is compatible with pursuing dreams together. Sanji stood up, frowned slightly, stared at Zeppu and said loudly, I don't refute you, so don't push yourself. Old man. Apart from anything else, but I will never allow you to belittle my cooking. Oh, is it so? Zeppu looked at Sanji with contempt in his eyes. Then I will leave the food for this table of guests to you. If you can satisfy them, I will take back my words. Zeppu still wants to give it a try, in case Sorata and the others recognize Sanji's cooking skills and let go of their dislike for him. After all, it was not easy to meet someone he could see. Then you just wait. Sanji yelled at Sorata and the others, then turned and went into the kitchen. When Sanji entered the kitchen, Zeppu turned his head to look at Sorata and said, How is it? Boy, I will ask Sanji to cook for you. If you are not satisfied, I will not charge you. I said old man, you don't want this guy to follow us to sea. Sorata looked at Zeff suspiciously. Let me tell you, there is only one doctor missing on my ship, but there is no place for another cook. Of course, it would be fine if a musician could come, after all, the sea is a bit boring. It's not that Sorata hates Sanji so much, it's this guy, also in the straw hats, who can display his full talents. He didn't even bring Zoro, how could he bring Sanji? Although he knew that even if he invited Zoro, that guy Zoro would not go to sea with him. That guy Zoro knows it's safe to go out to sea with Sorata, that is, because it's too safe, he won't follow Sorata. Without the trials of life and death, no matter how talented Zoro is, he cannot become the strongest. Just look at the three of Ahua now, and you will understand. They can still deal with ordinary pirates now. When they reach the Grand Line, if they don't find devil fruit for them, they will be completely reduced to salted fish and tool people. There are no weaklings there at all. Kuina has made an agreement with him since he was a child, so that he can always have such a firm belief. In addition, he has been helping Kuina with training all the time, so that Kuina has already surpassed the ordinary swordsman and is moving towards the great swordsman. In summary, there is really no place for Sanji on his ship. It's not the reason that Sanji and Kuina are a little bit upset because of Sanji's lewdness. He will not be so stingy. If he had to choose one of the straw hats, he would only choose Chopper. This guy holds a reward of 100 berry, fights for 100 million, can be a doctor, can be a pet, and can be used as emergency food when there is no food. It's a great accessory for home travel. But he also knew it was impossible. In fact, he knew that he might not even be able to convince Sanji. He doesn't have the charisma of Wong Luffy, and even if he wanted to, Sanji wouldn't necessarily go to sea with him. At this point, he is still very self-aware. Advertisement Chapter 19 Marine's Emphasis. Baratie. Seeing the dishes gradually filling up the whole table, Sorata and the others, who had long been so hungry, quickly started to eat. Not to mention, the dishes made by Sanji are really delicious. At least, this table is the best food they have eaten so far. Time pulled back a few hours ago. Not long after Sorata and the others killed the Krieg pirates, something happened to them in Marine Naval Headquarters, Marineford. In the world of One Piece, the central part of the entire Marine organization is also where Marine's strongest combat power is located. The whole building here is built for war. From a distance, this is a huge military fortress. The closer you get, the more spectacular the whole fortress will be. I saw that in the huge circular port in front of the fortress, there were countless military ships of different sizes coming in and out. These military aircrafts are full of Marines, and on some of them, some pirates chained by chains can still be seen. Among these pirates, the one with a reward of tens of millions is the bottom one. You can even see those pirates who offer a reward of 70 to 80 million, or even over 100 million, which are often seen in newspapers. This is the daily work of Marines who maintain law and order in the oceans of the world in the name of absolute justice. Catch pirates. Due to the large number of people and the restlessness of the pirates, even if they were locked up, the port was extremely noisy. Compared with the hustle and bustle of the port, the marshal's office in the largest building in the middle of the fortress at this time seemed too quiet. I saw 3 people sitting in the marshal's office. They are the Naval Headquarters Marshal, Sengoku, who sits in the middle and is known as Buddha's Sengoku, and the resourceful General Sengoku. Sitting on the left is the Naval Headquarters Vice Admiral, Crane, known as the Great Staff Officer. Seated on the right is Naval Headquarters Lieutenant Commander, Branu, who is in charge of intelligence delivery. At this time, Sengoku is wearing a pair of frog glasses, a long beard tied into a twist, and a hat with a seagull symbolizing Marine on his head. He was looking down at the 2 photos and documents on the table in front of him, thinking for a while. I saw that the picture above was the picture of Sorata and the others. The first one shows the 5 of them standing on the fence of the Dreadnought Saber and confronting the Krieg pirates. The second is a shot of the false Mary rushing through the middle of the disconnected Dreadnought Saber. Branu, tell me about the intelligence you analyzed. Sengoku suddenly looked up to Branu on the right and said. Yes, Mr. Sengoku. Branu, with green curly hair, sunglasses, thick lips, a white and blue striped shirt, and a marine cape, stood up quickly. He walked to a blackboard next to him, picked up a baton, pointed to the photo on the blackboard and said solemnly, Krieg pirates, the captain has offered a reward of 17 million, known as the strongest pirate group in East Blue. Okay, Branu, get to the point. Sengoku propped his hands on the table, a gleam flashed in his eyes, and he interrupted Branu with a flat opening. He didn't care about the Krieg pirates of East Blue, he just heard that there was a ship that had just sailed, and it seemed to have a great swordsman, so he was a little interested. Otherwise, there's no need for him, the marshal, to personally deal with a group of rookies who just went to sea. Advertisement. Is the job of being a marshal really very idle? Okay, Mr. Sengoku. Branu directly skipped Krieg's reward order and pointed to the 4 photos next to it. In addition to the 2 on the table, these 4 photos also had 2 close-up photos of Sorata and Kuina. However, these photos are not very clear, it seems that they should be taken at a very high altitude. I have to say, Marine, or it should be said, the intelligence of world government is really scary. I don't know if it was a coincidence or what, but there happened to be an intelligence seagull from the world government near the sea area where Sorata and the Krieg pirates were fighting. After Marine received the photos from the world government, it took less than 2 hours to quickly figure out the information about Sorata and the others. Branu first pointed to Sorata's photo and said, Sorata, near East Blue Gaia Kingdom, Simojuji Village, a student of Yixin Dojo, just went to sea a few days ago, and the purpose is unknown at present. Then he pointed to Kuina, also from the former Simojuji Village, Yixin Dojo, but she is not a student, but the daughter of the dojo owner. He stared at Sengoku and Crane for a moment and said solemnly, according to the known information, Kuina should be a swordsman, and Sorata is probably a great swordsman. He couldn't help but not pay attention to it. There are many sword masters in this world, but there are not many great sword masters in the whole world. Can you know their destination? At this moment, Chief of Staff Crane with a full head of white hair, a pair of emerald green earrings on his ears, and 2 gold bracelets in his right hand, put his hands on the table, calmly looked at the blackboard and asked a question. Hearing Crane's question, Branu pointed to a map of East Blue and said. From the analysis of their voyage route, they didn't stop at any island, but headed straight for Rog Town. As expected, their destination should be the Grand Line. He paused, then pointed to a photo with a fake Mary and said. Also, judging from the fact that the pirate flag is not flying on their ship, it is possible that they are simply playing. Okay. Sengoku nodded, looked at Suru and asked, what do you think? Crane bowed his head and thought for a while, then looked up at Sengoku Kaido. According to the current information, they are not found to be harmful. My suggestion is to observe first. Since their destination is the Grand Line, then wait for them to arrive. Grand Line will naturally know their purpose. And with the strength of their group, even if they get to the Grand Line, it's impossible for them to remain anonymous. Well, let's do this first. Sengoku turned to look at Branu and ordered. Branu, first send their photos to the branches of East Blue, and inform them that as long as this group of people have not done anything harmful, don't provoke them lightly. Yes, Mr. Sengoku. Branu gave a military salute, turned and left the office. At this time, there were only Sengoku and Suru in the office, and Sengoku's slightly serious expression relaxed. He leaned back on the chair and sighed to in the past 2 years, I can clearly feel that the number of pirates going out to sea has gradually increased. That's right. Not only the 4 seas, but also the Grand Line. There are a lot of pirates, and some of them are very powerful pirates, which has gradually increased the pressure on Marine in recent years. Okay, let's not talk about this. Sengoku frowned, rubbed his temples with his fingers and said with a headache, the one who has a headache now is the old boy Garp's grandson Ace. I heard that he is going to challenge Whitebeard. Yeah, this old boy happens to be in New World right now, so please don't let anything happen to you. Crane is also quite a headache. They're having a headache for Garp. East Blue, on the military aircraft outside the sea restaurant Baratie, at base 123, Captain Rust, the base chief, is having a headache for the immediate matter. What did you say? Last looked at several Marine soldiers in front of him and asked loudly. Mr. Zapp wants you to eat in the dining room. The last sentence, not this one. Advertisement. One of the Marines was puzzled. The last sentence, The last sentence is. Another Marine interrupted his thoughts. There are several suspicious characters in the restaurant, 4 men and 1 woman. Yes, this is the one. Those 4 men are covered with gold jewelry, so you can tell they were robbed. Marine, who was the first to speak, quickly took up the conversation, and said emphatically. He just couldn't understand the temperament of the nouveau riche in the other party. Do you see if it's them? Ruster handed them the photo in his hand. That's why he didn't go to the restaurant. He was here for dinner, but suddenly he received a message and a fax from the base. The news from Naval Headquarters reached the Marine branch base. Marine, who stayed at the base, saw that the sea area where their base commander was cruising was exactly the direction Sorata and his group were heading, so they quickly sent the news and photos to the military aircraft. After reading the photos and news, he was still lamenting that he was going to return to the voyage soon, and this patrol mission was over, so he would have no chance to meet Sorata and his gang. Unexpectedly, the surprise came so suddenly, and he just ran into it. Yes, just a few of them. Those Marine soldiers took the photo, glanced at it, and nodded repeatedly. Although the photo was not very clear, they could still recognize the 5 people in the restaurant at a glance. Sorata's silver hair and Kuina's dark blue hair are so recognizable. Hearing the answers from several people, Rust's face became serious. He bowed his head and thought for a while before raising his head and speaking to the Marines. Set sail. Go back to base 123, our mission is over. Hey, Captain Rust, aren't you going to eat? The Marines asked suspiciously. No, just look at this. He then handed them another piece of paper. These Marines took the paper, formed a circle, looked at the content on the paper, and watched their faces change drastically. They could never have imagined that the silver-haired brat in that group could be a great swordsman. Thinking of this, they involuntarily shuddered and broke out in cold sweat. The great swordsman, that is in the Grand Line, can be called a strong existence. Fortunately, they were thinking of pulling Captain Ruster to trouble him just now. Then they all breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, there was no real conflict with that group of people just now. Captain Nur asked, we're out to set sail. These Marines quickly said that they don't want to stay here now. Well, let's go. Watching these Marines rush out of the captain's cabin as quickly as if their butts were on fire. Last also breathed a sigh of relief, since the headquarters said not to provoke him, then he stayed away. Okay, he is not afraid. He just didn't want to conflict with the opponent. After all, there are so many pirates in the sea nearby, waiting for him, the head of base 123, to deal with them. He doesn't have the time to deal with this group of brats who aren't even pirates. That's it. Ruster kept nodding while lying on the chair. Chapter 20 The Girl Who Wants to be a Dragon-Slaying Warrior. Early morning. The sky is clear. The warm spring breeze blows slowly across the sea along the ocean current. The Pseudo Mary was sailing with the wind, and the sails on the mast were blown full by the wind. On both sides of the boat, groups of sea fish were clinging to the boat, swimming quickly towards the front. Some lively sea fish jumped out of the sea from time to time, splashing waves of water. The water splashes shone with colorful brilliance under the morning light. Around the ship, the sky is full of seabirds of prey. Sorata and the others have never seen so many seabirds since they went to sea. It can be seen from this phenomenon that they should not be far from the land. A few days ago, They had a meal at the sea restaurant Baratie, bought supplies for a few days, and then set off towards the sea and continued sailing. As for Sanji, Zeppu didn't mention it, and Sorata didn't ask. Pseudo-Mary. Sorata is basking in the sun on the sheep's head in the bow. Kuina, on the other hand, was sitting on a deck chair in the bow, reading newspapers and charts. This time they made a special trip to Golem Islands, which is the territory of the dragon pirates and the island of Nami's hometown, Kokoja village. In order to be able to go to the Golem Islands, Sorata also asked the old man Zeppu for the coordinate chart of the Golem Islands. Otherwise, East Blue is so big, and if there is no chart, it is impossible for him to find the location of the Golem Islands in a short time. Well, Sorata, why are you going to the Golem Islands? Is there anything special about it? Kuina looked up at Sorata on the sheep's head, and asked the question she wanted to ask at the sea restaurant Baratie. Their original plan was to go directly to the town of Rog, but in Baratie, Sorata suddenly changed his mind and wanted to go to the Golem Islands first. Sorata opened his eyes, stared at the sun and said quietly, "It's nothing, but there is a dragon living there, I want to go and see." Dragon. Kuina was taken aback for a moment, then said, "You mean the dragon pirates, right?" Yes. That has nothing to do with us." Sorata paused, looked at the black and white seagulls flying across the sky from time to time, and said in a low tone. "The main reason is that the evil dragon is not only oppressing the villages around his territory, but he is also fooling a naive girl." Girl. Kuina suddenly stood up and said loudly. Sorata also realized that he seemed to have said something that shouldn't be said, so he tried to speak calmly. Advertisement. Yes, it's the girl. Don't you know that the legend of the dragon is always accompanied by the girl? Yes. Kuina stared at him suspiciously. Yes. Sorata's voice was firmer than ever. Kuina stared at Sorata suspiciously for a while and continued. "You just say that you want to defeat the dragon, save the village there, and be a hero, or else it's fine. What a simple thing, it has to be so complicated." Kuina lowered her head and thought for a while, her calm eyes suddenly brightened. A beautiful girl who defeated a dragon must be cool. She raised her head, stared ahead excitedly, and said loudly. "I made a decision." "Decided what?" "I decided, Arlong is up to me to beat." Kuina turned her head to stare at Sorata and said firmly. Okay, our dragon-slaying girl, Kuina, will definitely leave your legend in the future." Kuina raised her head slightly, showing a proud expression. Seeing that Kuina no longer asked about the girl, Sorata quietly wiped the cold sweat off his brow. He almost slipped his tongue. In fact, he suddenly thought of Nami, and then thought that dozens of villages in the Arlong domain were still being oppressed, so he suddenly changed his course and went straight to the Golem Islands. If he doesn't care this time, the dozens of villages will have to wait for 2 years until Wang Luffy goes to sea before they can be rescued. Then in the past 2 years, how many tragedies have to be caused to families? He can't control what he doesn't know, but since he knows, he must control it. This is the sense of justice that he grew up under the red flag in his previous life and could not change in his life. And for him, to destroy the dragon pirates is as simple as crushing an ant. Since it is simple and in line with his justice, then he must do it. In fact, he is right, he is really a partner of justice, of course he is not the virgin, he will not let go of any evil person he meets. Evil is evil, he doesn't believe that he can become a Buddha immediately by laying down the butcher's knife. If all the evildoers can become Buddhas, then, what about the people he hurt? Who will solve their grievances and who will pay them back? So since we met him, we can only send them all to hell to repent. As more and more seabirds joined the seabirds flying with them, a long coastline gradually appeared in front of them. Advertisement. As the distance from the coastline gradually shortened, Sorata could already smell a faint smell of soil. He took a deep breath, sat up straight, turned his legs up, turned his butt on the sheep's head, faced the coastline ahead, and glanced at it. Okay. He found that on this side, he did not see the entrance to the Dragon Pirate Station. If he remembered correctly, the Dragon Pirate Station was built by the sea. He turned around, jumped off the sheep's head, and shouted to the rear wheelhouse. Adao, adjust the direction, let's look around the island and see where the entrance of the Dragon Pirates is. To understanding, Adao, who was sitting in a daze on a chair in the wheelhouse, quickly stood up and shouted Kaido to the outside. He walked up to the rudder stick, first handed the cigarette between his fingers to his mouth and drank it, then held the rudder stick with both hands, and broke it hard to the left. I saw the fake Mary outside, and immediately turned to the left. At this moment, Awa came out of the kitchen with a reward order in his hand. He walked slowly to the bow, looked at Sorata, stretched out his hand and pushed the mirror frame, his eyes flashed. Sure enough, Sorata's target is the Dragon Pirates. Sorata looked at Awa who was coming, and motioned him to give the reward order to Kuina. Kuina, take a look. After all, this is the opponent you have to face. Before you become a great swordsman, don't underestimate any opponent. Okay, I know. Kuina took the reward order from Ahua and watched it. It turns out that the members of the Dragon Pirates are all Murlocs. She sighed as she looked at Arlong's reward order. Then she spoke with a little disgust. It looks really ugly. Don't look at them as ugly, they are new humans that combine the characteristics of fish and humans. They are stronger than ordinary humans. When fighting in water, their strength will be doubled. Sorata combined the information he knew and explained to Kuina. 6 years ago, the Murloc pirates of the Grand Line disbanded, and the evil dragon was one of them. Later, he formed his own dragon pirates, came to East Blue from the Grand Line, and ruled the Golem Islands. Why do you know so much? Kuina stared at Sorata suspiciously and asked. Me, but I read newspapers every day, and there are some weird books. That's right, I never saw your book leave your hand when I was a child. Kuina nodded, recalled for a while, and wanted to continue to look at the reward order in his hand. Okay. At this moment, she suddenly turned her head and looked strangely at the three Ahuas who were already standing on the bow. You three, what's the matter? Chapter 21. No one can do without anyone on board. I saw the lively and amusing trio in the past, but now they all lowered their faces, shrugged their bodies, and looked gloomy. Sorata also saw their state, walked over and patted their shoulders one by one, and asked with concern. Is there any problem? Tell me and I will help you share. Adao took a puff of cigarette, Kaido depressed. It's nothing serious, I just feel that I am so useless, and I can't help you at all in the face of a powerful pirate group. They all know that facing the dragon pirates this time, they basically can only stay on the boat and watch the ship, because none of the members of the dragon pirates can beat them. This is still East Blue, and when they get to the Grand Line, they will be even more out of picture. So it's this one. Sorata breathed a sigh of relief, thinking what happened to these three guys. He looked at the three of Awa and spoke seriously. You didn't board the ship for fighting, and there are not only combatants on a ship. He looked at Awa. Take Awa as an example, if there is no Awa on our boat, then we can only eat our own cooking, think about that feeling. Everyone glanced at Awa, and shuddered at the thought that they could only eat food made by themselves every day. He shook his head again and again. After listening to Sorata's words, Ahua's gloomy face instantly turned bright when he saw everyone's reaction. He pushed the frame of the mirror, straightened his plump stomach, and raised his head with a proud look. So I'm so indispensable. Sorata then looked at Adao, and Adao, if there is no Adao on our boat, who will start and repair this big guy under our feet? After hearing this, the corners of Adao's mouth curled up, and a smile quickly climbed up his entire face. He even smoked a little more gracefully. What about me? What about me? Arlo looked at Sorata expectantly, and shouted in a slightly hasty voice. You. Sorata stroked her chin and looked at Aluo in deep thought. Aluo watched Sorata's reaction, his expectant eyes gradually turned gray, and he looked at the sea surface blankly, as if his whole body was shrouded in shadow, making people feel like he was going to jump into the sea in the next moment. Seeing Aluo's appearance, Sorata smiled and decided not to tease him anymore. He stared at Aluo and suddenly shouted, of course you are also very important. Hearing Sorata's roar, Arlo raised his head stiffly and looked at Sorata pitifully. Really? Real? Sorata nodded and answered in the affirmative. Among the few of us, only you, Arlo, can stay on the small observation deck all day, escorting our voyage. Advertisement. You are the eyes on our ship. Without you, our voyage would be as if we were blind. The more Sorata talked, the straighter Aluo's waist became, and in the end, the Shaw mat hairstyle on his head turned up. Seeing the three regaining confidence, Sorata clapped her hands to attract their attention. Then he said to them, so, each of you is a unique existence, don't underestimate yourself, we can't do without any of you on board. He paused, then joked. If you're all going to fight, what do you want me and Kuina to do? Do you think it makes sense? The three of Ahua nodded again and again. And strength is a thing, there is still a shortcut. Sorata, do you have a way to improve your strength? Sorata's voice came in their ears, and they quickly stared at Sorata excitedly. No one wants to be weak, even if they all know that even if they are weak, Sorata will not give up on them. But if there is a way to quickly increase strength, no one can remain indifferent. Have you heard of devil fruit? Devil fruit. Ava's face showed doubts. At this moment, Aluo, who was thinking with his head down, seemed to have thought of something, and suddenly said, is it a secret treasure of the sea that can make people strong and give people the power of demons? He heard it from others when he was a gangster. It's a secret sea treasure that can give people some kind of superpower, called devil fruit. Then Sorata, is your ability devil fruit? Adao took a puff of cigarette, looked at Sorata curiously and asked. Sorata lowered her head and pondered for a while, my abilities don't come from devil fruit, you can regard me as a human born with special abilities. Oh, they nodded in unison. Sorata went on to explain. Devil fruit abilities fall into three main categories, Paramesha, Zone, and Logia. You can get a devil fruit at random, and it's enough to deal with ordinary dangers. But I heard that the market price of any devil fruit is at least 100 million belly. Arlo turned around and said in distress. Hey, is it so expensive? Both Awa and Adao showed surprise expressions on their faces at the same time. Advertisement. Don't look at them picking up nearly 20 million berry on the Krieg pirates, just think that 100 million is nothing. But don't forget that the Krieg pirates are the largest pirate group in East Blue. They can only get 2,000, so how many pirate groups have to be destroyed to make up the 100 million? Sorata looked at them and smiled. Don't worry, as long as there is news about devil fruit, I will definitely find it for you. He paused and continued. And I also know that you can find a lot of devil fruit there. Of course he knows, if he really can't find devil fruit by then, he can only go to Doflamingo to ask for it in advance. Really? Sorata. The three of Ahua stared at Sorata nervously. They knew that Sorata would not lie to them, but they still wanted an affirmative answer from Sorata. Well, when did I lie to you? Sorata nodded affirmatively. Oye. The three guys got Sorata's answer, jumped to their feet, yelled at the bow, and resumed their former liveliness. Kuina watched them quietly from the sidelines, and when she saw that the three of Ahua had regained their vivacity, a smile appeared on her face. She knows what a devil fruit is, and Sorata once planned to find a devil fruit for her so that he could improve his physical fitness. But was rejected by her. She just wanted to become a great swordsman by her own ability. And devil fruit isn't all about benefits. This thing has one of the most fatal weaknesses for sailors, and that is the fear of sea water. She is a swordsman, her attack power is strong enough, there is no need to find a devil fruit's weakness for herself. So she never thought about eating devil fruit. Of course, if it is the ability of heaven defying, then that's another story. What? At this moment, Sorata and Kuina were taken aback at the same time, and they looked at each other. Chi-Chi looked at the opposite coastline, and the color of knowledge and knowledge was quietly activated. Kuina can only perceive that there are many messy and flustered auras in the distant village. But Sorata was different, he knew what happened in the opposite village with just a flash of red in his eyes. He turned his head to the three of Ahua and said, "Let's land here. You are waiting for us here. We will come back after dealing with the dragon pirates." To understanding. The three of Ahua answered loudly, turned around and got busy. And Sorata turned her head to look at the distant village, thinking about something. It seems that these miscellaneous fish have to be cleaned up first, so that they don't run away at that time. The scourge is not small. After all, they are murlocs. As long as these guys hide in the sea, it's really hard to find them. Chapter 22 We are strong. The dragon pirates have ruled the island for nearly 6 years. As long as it is a village on this island, each villager must pay a head fee to the dragon pirates every month. If you can't afford it, there is only one word, and that is death. If anyone dares to resist, then facing them will be the destruction of the entire village. So far no one has dared to really resist. In the beginning, they also had hope, hoping that Marine would come to attack this group of pirates. But when the dragon pirates easily defeated the 5 warships that came to attack them, they were desperate. Afterwards, no matter how many Marines came, when faced with this group of monsters, they were all as fragile as eggs that could be crushed with one hand. This let them know that the power displayed by this group of monsters is completely unmatched by humans. And what made them even more desperate was that a Marine general who looked like a mouse came later, not only did not go to crusade against the dragon pirates, but also used his Marine rights to block the news here. If anyone went to Marine for help, the guy turned around and passed the message to Arlong. In this way, not only the villager who asked for help will die miserably, but even the village where he lives will be implicated. Just like that, their last glimmer of hope was completely ruined. So far, the residents of this island have survived silently for 6 years in such a dire and fiery environment. And today happens to be the collection day once a month. A group of murlocs, led by 2 cadres, walked into Kokoja village, which is the village where Nami lives. You can see a cartilaginous murloc walking in the front. This guy was wearing a dark blue sleeveless karate suit, with 2 braids in his hair, 2 machete-like fins on his arms, and explosive muscles all over his body, exuding a daunting aura. This dress looks like a cadre of the Dragon Pirates, a former member of the Sun Pirates, Kruby. One step behind Kruby was a kissing murloc in a blue sleeveless shirt, black shorts, short blonde hair, and protruding lips that looked like a gunfish. This one should be the cadre of the Dragon Pirates, a former member of the Sun Pirates, Ju. Led by 2 cadres, the murlocs came to the middle of the only street in the village. Without their urging, the villagers spontaneously walked out of the room, took money one by one, lined up, and walked up to the murlocs. Throw the money they earned through a month of hard work into an empty bag held by a murloc. Hurry up, what are you doing? Don't you have enough money? The murloc who collected the money stared at the villager who was a little slower to pay the money in front of him with fierce eyes. He snatched the money from the villager, turned it upside down, and casually threw it into the pocket in front of him. Then he stretched out his hand, grabbed the villager's hand vigorously, and threw him to the ground aside. The villager who fell on the ground didn't dare to say anything, he just stood up silently, and limped towards the next house. The other villagers watched all this blankly, they were all used to it. He is used to the strength of the murlocs, the domineering murlocs, and the oppression of the murlocs. After a while, the empty bag in front of the murloc collecting money was filled with money. Kruby glanced indifferently, and the villagers standing on both sides of the street walked towards the orange orchard with the murlocs, holding Chu with his hands in his pockets without saying a word. Advertisement. There is the last person in this village, even if the other party is Nami's sister, they have to pay. After collecting the last person's head money, their work for today is over. Because Kokoja village is the closest village to Arlong Paradise, they are usually the last to come here to collect money. Kruby and Ju who were walking in front suddenly stopped, causing the murlocs behind them to be in a commotion. What's wrong? They all raised their heads and looked forward, only to see a man and a woman walking towards them outside the entrance of the village. These 2 are Sorata and Kuina who just came from the sea. They parked the boat on the simple pier outside the village, and headed straight towards the village, just in time to run into a group of murlocs who were about to leave the village. staring at the two human imps walking across. Krieg asked a Murloc behind him, "Did I miss two? Why haven't I seen these two before?" This Murloc was in charge of counting points. He raised the money bag on his handle, and said Kaido in an affirmative tone. "Except for the head fee of Nami's sister in the Orange Orchard, all other money has been collected." Hearing the reply, Krieg turned his head and stared at Sorata and Kuina coldly. "If the calculation is correct, then these two humans came from outside, so let's kill them." "That's right, kill them, they won't let the news here leak out easily." Watching the opposite Murloc stop, Sorata also stopped and handed it over to Kuina. He took off the wine gourd around his waist, and stood there lazily, drinking the wine, staring playfully at the Murloc opposite, waiting for Kuina's performance. Kuina glanced indifferently at the Murloc opposite, and finally stopped her gaze on Krieg and chirped. Obviously, among this group of Murlocs, Kuina only pays attention to them. These two Murlocs know who they are at a glance, and they are easy to recognize. Kuina's footsteps did not stop, but accelerated towards the Murloc. The villagers standing under the eaves on both sides saw that Kuina not only didn't stop when he saw the Murloc, but speeded up instead. I couldn't help but my heart tightened, showing a worried expression. At this moment, a middle-aged man in a uniform, with 4 scars across his face and a windmill on his hat, walked out of the next room quickly, and handed Kuina to him. Stopped. When Sorata saw the middle-aged uncle appearing, a smile flashed in his eyes. He recognized this uncle at a glance. He was the village's security officer, Ajian. This guy is a pretty gentle character, and he's like a father figure to Nami and Nokigo. Ajian saw that the girl didn't run away when she saw the Murloc, but went straight to the Murloc, so he couldn't help but rushed out of the room and stopped her. These two outer islanders should be here for the first time. They don't know the ferocity of the Murlocs, so they are so indifferent when facing the Murlocs. These two must be driven out of the village before the Murlocs come over. Many thoughts flashed through Ajian's mind. Immediately, he stared at Kuina, with a deliberately cold face, and said in a bad tone. "Little girl, outsiders are not welcome here, please leave." Kuina looked at Ajian, a trace of tenderness flashed in her indifferent eyes. Although the uncle's tone was not very nice, he couldn't hide the eagerness and concern in his eyes. Advertisement. Seeing Kuina's gaze, Sorata shrugged and walked over, beckoning Kuina to continue. He embraced Ajian's shoulder, pulled it aside, smiled and said to Ajian, "Thank you, uncle, we appreciate your kindness, we know what we are doing." These words made Ajian stunned. At this moment of stupefaction, Kuina had already walked more than 10 meters away. Seeing Kuina who was about to walk in front of the Murloc, Ajian quickly shouted, "Don't go there, little girl." Kuina, who was going forward, turned around at this moment and gave Ajian a smiling face. "It's okay uncle, we came here specially to deal with Arlong." "Fix Arlong." Ajian had a shocked expression on his face. "Yeah, look." Sorata pointed ahead. Just when Kuina turned to look at Jian, Ju made a move. He doesn't care about sneak attack or not, as long as he can solve the enemy. He puffed out his barrel-like mouth and squirted a water cannon at Kuina. The water cannon shot towards the back of Kuina's head quickly like a bullet out of the chamber. Chu stared at Kuina excitedly, he was sure that he could kill Kuina with one blow. However, the development of things is often not as simple as he imagined. Seeing that Kuina tilted her head slightly like a prophet, she easily avoided the blister. Blisters brushed past Kuina's ear and shot toward Sorata behind him. Seeing the blisters rushing toward them, Ajian's pupils dilated instantly, and his body broke out in cold sweat. He subconsciously wanted to pull Sorata to hide, but at this moment he suddenly found that the space around him seemed to freeze for some time, making him unable to move at all. And the water bubble that shot at them also hovered in front of them, unable to move forward any further. It may be a matter of a moment, Ajian suddenly felt that the surrounding space was flowing again. "I saw the blisters in front of me fall to the ground with a snap." Ajian stared, looking at the blisters on the ground in horror. What kind of power is this? If it is such a power, maybe it can really defeat Arlong. A gleam of hope flashed in Ajian's eyes at first, and then quickly darkened. No, it's impossible, how could those monsters be rivaled by humans? He has experienced too much despair, and he no longer believes that any human can defeat Arlong. He shook his head and looked up at Sorata. Sorata noticed Ajian's gaze, raised the wine gourd and took a sip, then turned to look at him and smiled. "I said we are here to deal with Arlong." He paused, and his tone became more serious. "Well, we are very strong." Then he turned his head to look at Kuina, motioning for Ajian to watch. Perhaps only the established facts can make these desperate villagers believe that they can really destroy the evil dragon pirates. Chapter 23 Aren't Murlocs just one knife? As soon as Krieg and Sorata appeared, they discovered that they were not ordinary humans. The eyes of the two of Sorata are too plain to indifferent, looking at them is like looking at fish waiting to be slaughtered. He hated the look he'd had so often in his hometown. So before Kuina turned his head and just avoided Ju's blisters, he rushed over quickly. He, who has rich combat experience, will not let this opportunity go. He wanted to get rid of this human girl in an instant, and then face the boy behind. In his feeling, that silver-haired boy was too dangerous, which was due to his beast instinct. Murloc karate arm slash. Krieg, who was already taller than ordinary humans, stood in front of Kuina like a titan, his sturdy body completely shrouded Kuina in the shadow. He raised his arms, exposing the scimitar-like wing fins on his elbows, and slashed hard at Kuina's neck from top to bottom. There was a red light in Kuina's eyes. She turned around and lowered her head to escape the fierce slash. She stepped forward and passed under Kruby's arms. Choke. Standing behind Kruby, Kuina drew the knife quickly, with a slash in his right hand, and held the knife in the backhand, slanting backwards and upwards, throwing and pulling, leaving Kruby alone, and then heading towards the crowd of fish. After Kuina took 3 or 4 steps, his back seemed to be still, and he held it all the time, swinging his wing fins and slashing down at Kruby, as if he had lost all his strength. His legs softened, and his body quickly rushed towards the ground. Go. Boom. There was a dull sound of an object falling to the ground, and faint dust was splashed. Kruby, who was thrown on the ground, opened his eyes angrily, and his eyes were full of unwillingness. He is a murloc. How could he fall under the feet of a human so easily? He wanted to struggle, but it didn't help. On the contrary, the more he struggled, the faster his vitality was lost. From his mouth, eyes, and ears, blood flowed out like a fountain, and soon stained a large part of his body red. In the end, his body twitched crazily a few times, and then he was completely silent, and the last gleam of brilliance in his eyes also lost. Only then did everyone see that there was a penetrating wound on the back of Kruby's head. Kroby, Chu, who was also a cadre and came from the Grand Line together, changed his face and looked at Kuina in horror. This feeling of facing a strong man made him feel like he had returned to the Fishman Island. He was still a little luo at that time, and he could only hide behind the captain and Arlong. Since he came to East Blue, he had never encountered this kind of feeling that made him tremble all over. There are no ferocious pirates, no slave traders, and no celestial dragons, just like paradise. Behind the village road, the villagers stared wide-eyed, as if they had seen something incredible. Advertisement. Hey, are you kidding me? Killed the cadres of the dragon pirates with one blow. Jien stood beside Sorata, looking at Kuina's back in astonishment. Is it really that powerful? The opponent is a monster that can sink a warship with one blow. Then he turned to look at Sorata, a blazing gleam in his eyes. Sorata didn't look back, just patted Jien's shoulder lightly, and said again. I said it all, we are very strong. Take a good look at it. This time Jien finally believed a little bit, believing that Sorata and the others could really defeat Arlong. He turned his head and looked at Kuina again. His face was full of excitement. The human girl not only easily avoided Chirp and Kruby's ultimate moves, but also killed Kruby with a single blow. The Murloc standing behind Ju was both angry and terrified. Of all the humans they've met since they came to East Blue, there's nothing they can't handle. Even the Marines here have to cooperate with them, otherwise they will kill those Marines as easily as crushing ants. As time passed, the Murlocs, who were accustomed to domineering, became more and more swollen and cruel. In their view, the humans in East Blue are a group of inferior races, and they, the great Murlocs, are the masters of humans. The killing and plundering of human beings is like pigs raised at home. They completely forgot how frightened and humble they were at the Grand Line. And the appearance of Kuina is like a basin of cold water poured on their heads, making them collectively recall the terrifying humans on the Grand Line. You human being must not belong to East Blue. Chu looked at Kuina who was walking over, his eyes were red. Kuina stared at Ju indifferently, without stopping. It is this kind of look, he hates this kind of look, and he is also extremely afraid of this kind of look. You inferior person, go to hell. He stared at his completely red eyes, and roared angrily, as if this would dispel the fear in his heart. Beifa water gun. He took a deep breath, puffed up his mouth, and his lips trembled as quickly as the barrel of a machine gun. Bubbles, like bullets, sprayed towards Kuina. Kuina didn't dodge or dodge. While heading towards the blisters, he quickly swung the knife in his hand. I saw a flash of knife light. The water bubbles that were supposed to shoot directly at Kuina were cut in half by the knife light, and hit the ground on Kuina's left and right sides respectively, leaving potholes one after another. In just a split second, Kuina had already rushed forward and stood in front of Ju. Advertisement. She held the knife indifferently, ignoring Ju's eyes that were completely blood red and his terrified expression on Ultimate's face. He didn't give Ju a chance to retreat at all, and quickly cut Ju's throat with a knife from the bottom up. Chirp stood stiffly on the spot, covering his throat with his hands, his skin all over his body turned from blue to red. He wanted to make a sound, but couldn't. Then, as if he had lost all his strength, he fell to his knees and rushed forward. Boom. In the footsteps of Kruby. Kuina stood beside Ju with an indifferent expression, and swung the knife in her hand downward, shaking the bloodline off the blade. Chirp. Seeing Chu who fell on the ground twitching wildly, the remaining Murlocs let out a loud cry. Then he ran towards the rear in horror, as if there was some scourge behind him. From Kuina walking towards the Murlocs to the death of Kruby and Chu, it seemed like a long time, but in fact it only took about 10 seconds. The villagers behind looked at the Murlocs rushing towards them, and quickly retreated to both sides of the village road. Then they all stared at Kuina excitedly. 2 knives, only 2 knives, this girl easily killed the 2 cadres of the dragon pirates. They had never seen such a powerful human being, nor had they seen a Murloc with such an expression. It turns out that Murlocs are also afraid, terrified, and run away. Kuina stood where she was, looking at the fleeing murlocs. Her eyes were full of indifference, and she didn't have any kindness in her heart for beheading murlocs. She put the knife back into its sheath, bent her left knee, tightened her hand holding the knife, and looked up at all the fleeing murlocs in front of her. Gathered strength and ejected. Whoosh. Kuina's body appeared in front of the murloc as if teleported. A saber light flashed across every murloc, making the fleeing murlocs all frozen in place as if they had been hit by a freeze spell. Ding. Slash all things with one blow. At this time, the sound of Kuina withdrawing the knife came from the wind. It was also the sound of withdrawing the knife that broke the murloc's hold technique. Puff. A line of blood appeared on the waist of each murloc, and then their upper bodies were neatly drawn sideways, spurting out a large amount of blood. Kuina turned around, ignoring the murlocs who had been cut in half, and carefully avoided the river of blood on the ground, heading towards Sorata. Chapter 24 Heroes are not so easy to be. Under the eaves on both sides of the village road. The villagers stared blankly at the stumped limbs all over the ground. They first took a step back subconsciously, and then seemed to understand something. Their already numb pupils, like a mirror that has wiped off the mist, shone with a ray of hope. They stared excitedly at Kuina passing by the dead body, not daring to make a sound. They are afraid. They are afraid that everything in front of them is just a dream. The scene in front of them had appeared in their dreams countless times, and every time they woke up excitedly, they were disappointed to find that everything was fake. This time, they knew clearly that this was not a dream, but they still didn't dare to easily break the silence around them. Seeing Kuina approaching, Ajien was subconsciously forced to retreat by the murderous aura remaining on Kuina. Then he instantly understood that the opposite was not a murloc but a benefactor, so he didn't have to be afraid. He shook his head, staring excitedly at Kuina. Seeing Kuina approaching, Sorata's eyes flashed with tenderness, and she stretched out her right hand to wipe off a drop of blood that she accidentally splashed on her face just now. Kuina, now you are a real hero. Only then did Kuina put away the indifferent expression on her face, revealing a smile like thousands of flowers blooming. This smile not only illuminated Aegean's desperate heart, but also illuminated the hearts of the surrounding villagers. Only then did they wake up like a dream. A full 6 years. Although it is only 6 years, it is not very long. But life feels like years. During these 6 years, it is unknown how many families and people died at the hands of these brutal murlocs. And now, they finally waited for a person, a heroic person. She killed murlocs as easily as if she was really a fish on the chopping board. They waited for this moment for too long. Jien stared at Kuina, trembling all over, and an unimaginable excitement surged in his heart. You, who are you? We. Sorata took Kuina's hand and looked up to the excited eyes of the surrounding villagers. You can call us, partners of justice. Justice. Is it justice? They didn't feel justice from Marine, but from two strangers. When they came to their senses, Sorata and Kuina had already walked out of the village. They looked at the backs of Sorata and Kuina from a distance, their eyes were full of hope, and they shouted loudly in unison. Advertisement. Please, we must defeat the dragon pirates. A partner of justice. Their excitement can be felt from afar. It was an emotion and impulse that had been suppressed for a long time, and then suddenly erupted like a volcano. Let Sorata and Kuina, who are in it, feel an unprecedented joy on the spiritual level. Kuina squinted her eyes, enjoying it quite a bit. This feeling of being expected by so many people is very fascinating, otherwise there would not be so many people wanting to be a hero. Then she opened her eyes, turned around, and said solemnly to the villagers who were looking forward and hoping. Don't worry. Bet on our lives, we will definitely slaughter the dragon pirates. The voice was not loud, but it rang clearly in the ears of every villager. The villagers stood there for a long time as they looked at the two figures heading towards the dragon's territory in the distance. They deeply remembered these two teenagers and girls. Especially girls. Her beauty, the indifference on her expression when killing the murlocs, and the last smile that shone into their hearts. They prayed that the girl would succeed in slaying the dragon, and also prayed that she would not be injured. Even if they didn't succeed in slaying the dragon in the end. They also don't want to be oppressed by the dragon pirates anymore. Because the murloc corpses all over the ground were clearly telling them that the murlocs were not so invincible. This made the anger in their hearts, and the shackles have been completely opened. On the way to Arlong's paradise, Kuina kept her head down, looking preoccupied. Sorata looked at Kuina with concern and asked, What's wrong? Kuina. It's nothing, it's just that there are some things I can't figure out. What's the matter? Let me hear it. When I first walked into the village, I could clearly feel the fear and numbness of the villagers. That kind of numbness can't be formed overnight, it must be oppressed for a long time. Kuina looked up at Sorata and asked in doubt. But I can't figure it out. East Blue says it's big, but it's actually very small. How can a pirate group keep humans in captivity like animals for 6 years in human territory? She frowned slightly, with a flash of excitement in her eyes, and asked loudly. Where are those marines? Where's the righteous marine? Sorata raised his hand and rubbed her head, looked at the Arlong paradise in the distance, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and said quietly. Don't think too much about the justice of the high-level marines. Most of their justice is for the nobles, but for the common people, they don't care so much. Often the ones who care the most about civilians are the lowest and most marine soldiers. Advertisement. But they have no right, nor the strength to manage these powerful pirates. As that's so, Kuina nodded, showing an expression of enlightenment. What about Garp, the marine hero? We grew up listening to his legends. Why didn't he come when there was such a bad pirate in our hometown? Kuina then asked rather angrily. There are not many people in East Blue who don't admire Garp. After all, he is a member of his own family, and he is also known as a hero. He is indeed the pride of most civilians and marines. But heroes also have time to spare. Heroes also obey the rules of celestial dragons and world government. So don't look at Garp as a hero. In fact, this guy is not so free. New World needs him, Naval Headquarters needs him, and will still need him when the powerful pirates show up. This guy was so busy that his grandson was handed over to bandits, causing his two grandsons to become pirates in the end. Of course, with the characters of Ace and Luffy, even if Garp leads them himself, he might become a pirate. So it's not easy to be a hero. If it weren't for Garp's refusal to be promoted to admiral, I'm afraid he wouldn't even have the time to go home to see his grandson on his annual vacation. But Sorata didn't explain this to Kuina, he just said it lightly. Maybe just don't know. After all, he's not, and he goes back to East Blue often, doesn't he? And, what? And I also heard that the Dragon Pirates and Colonel Marine, Rat, of the nearby Marine 16 branch are colluding with each other. In this way, in the other marine bases of East Blue, those marines who really have justice in their hearts will not get the news here, so they will not be able to come to fight against the Dragon Pirates. Hearing this, Kuina's eyes were filled with coldness, she gritted her teeth and said angrily. Damn that Colonel Mouse. Sometimes the enemies on the surface are not so scary, what is scary is the kind that help the enemy, commonly known as Urwuzi. Such people are often more cruel and hateful than the enemy. They are all a group of soft bones who bully the weak and fear the tough, flattering their superiors and arrogant and domineering towards their subordinates. Okay. Don't worry, none of them can escape. There was a red light in Sorata's eyes, and he had already sensed that there were two parties in Arlong Paradise. And from the analysis of breath, it doesn't look like an enemy. Then they can only be allies. So the mouse guy should be in Arlong's land right now. Chapter 25 Like a Shinigami. At this time, in Arlong Paradise, a dirty deal is going on. Today is not only the time for the Dragon Pirates to collect head fees, but also the time for them to pay Colonel Mouse black money. The entire Arlong Paradise is surrounded by high stone walls, and there is only a huge stone gate facing the sea. Inside the stone gate is a long waterway, which was specially designed by the evil dragon for their identity as Murlocs. There are two pools of equal width beside the waterway. These two pools are the places where the Dragon Pirates usually play. At the end of the waterway is a tall 5-story tower-like building. On the top of the building is a shark spire with a big mouth open. The pirate flag of the Dragon Pirates is fluttering in the wind. On the aisle between the tower building and the waterway, there is a tall, long and sharp nose with a jagged sawtooth shark man. This Murloc is none other than Arlong, the captain of the Dragon Pirates. Sitting directly opposite Arlong was a mouse-like man wearing a marine officer's overcoat, and behind him stood two other marines. I think this guy is Colonel Mouse. This is for this month, accept it. Arlong took a thick wad of money from the subordinate behind him, put it on the table, and pushed it towards Colonel Mouse. Chirp. Brother Arlong, your mind is completely different from that of ordinary pirates. Colonel Mouse looked at the money in front of him with a smile on his face. Then he quickly reached for the money, put it in his pocket, nodded in satisfaction, and smiled at Arlong. You really understand the world. Scary ha ha ha, we are each other. Arlong opened his hands and laughed loudly. As long as you are willing to be my friend, you can taste endless sweetness here in East Blue. Then he stopped laughing, retracted his hands, sat up straight, put his hands on the table, and stared at Colonel Mouse with slightly squinted eyes. Being able to understand this also proves that you are a smart Colonel Marine. Although there was a smile on his face, his eyes were cold. This guy is a total racist. It believes that mermaids are inherently stronger than humans, and humans who resist mermaids are tantamount to violating the laws of nature. This guy is not only greedy and cruel, but also addicted to money, thinking that money is the best thing and the most reliable thing. Facing Arlong's cold eyes, the mouse broke out in a little cold sweat, and said with an awkward smile, "It's been really troublesome all this time." Scary ha ha ha, what are you talking about now? Harmony can make money. Arlong lay back, his upright body relaxing. He laughed at the mouse and said, "Money is a good thing, more trustworthy than anything else. Although I hate humans very much, but a sensible guy like you is an exception." Looking at Arlong, Colonel Mouse felt awkward. Even though he knew what Arlong was saying was bullshit, he still had to laugh along with it, nodding in response. Who told Arlong to be better than him, or his cash cow? It wasn't until Arlong finished speaking that the mouse quickly stood up and said to Arlong, "Then, I will excuse you today." In fact, he didn't want to stay here at all. The Murlocs around him looked at him as if they were animals, which made him feel uncomfortable all over. At this moment, a joking voice suddenly came from the wall on the left. Walk. Advertisement. Where are you going? You guys should wait and go to hell together. Who? The 20 or so Murlocs who were lying or sitting by the pools on both sides, together with Arlong and the rats, all looked at the high wall on the left in unison. I saw two more people on the high wall on the left. These two are of course Sorata and Kuina. For a while they stood on the fence, listening to Arlong and the mouse talk. Sorata didn't make a sound until Colonel Mouse wanted to leave. The Murlocs by the swimming pool saw that they were just two humans, and Chi-Chi breathed a sigh of relief, and stopped paying attention to what to do next. Arlong, on the other hand, was full of hostility. These two humans were actually standing higher than him. How could a lowly race like humans make him, a great Murloc, look up to him? He would rather these two humans break through the wall than stand on the wall of his own house. He stared fiercely at the two men on the wall. Two human beings dare to come to my dragon's territory and threaten my guests. You are really looking for death. As he spoke, he crushed the wine glass in his hand, and the wine fell on his palm. He grabbed the wine and the fragments of the glass, and then threw his arms towards Sorata and the two of them. Looking at the flying glass shards and water bubbles, Sorata and Kuina's eyes didn't fluctuate at all. There was a red light in their eyes, and they turned their heads slightly and avoided it. Kuina stared at Colonel Mouse as soon as he stood on the fence. And Sorata stared at Arlong with great interest, not hiding the disgust and indifference in her eyes at all. It was Sorata's eyes like looking at the fish on the chopping board, which completely angered Arlong. After coming to East Blue, he has always been the only one who can look at humans like this. When will humans dare to look at him like this? His eyes were suddenly blood red, with a bloodthirsty light flashing. He stared fiercely at Sorata and roared loudly. Citizens, tear them apart for me. Arlong's murderous voice resounded throughout the Arlong paradise. The Murlocs by the pool stood up when Arlong smashed the glass and shot. At this time, they heard the voice of the boss, and all of them rushed towards Sorata and the others with fierce eyes. Seeing the charging Murloc, Sorata was about to move when Kuina spoke. Sorata, yes, leave it to me. She couldn't bear the killing intent at this moment. Sorata stopped quickly, touched her head, and apologized to Kuina repeatedly. Sorry, Kuina, look at my brain, I almost forgot. He looked at these Murlocs with itchy hands, and it had been a long time since he had touched them. Although these Murlocs were only a one-shot job, they couldn't be full, but they could quench their thirst. Kuina's eyes have been staring at Colonel Mouse from beginning to end. She stands on the wall like a Shinigami, her eyes are full of indifference. The first person she tried to kill was the rat. The boundless killing intent revealed in Kuina's eyes made the mouse's whole body ache, as if being pricked by a needle. Alarm bells rang in his heart. Advertisement. Danger, danger, danger. The mouse froze in place, sweating profusely. He looked up at Kuina and roared inwardly. What's the matter with this woman? He didn't know her. Why did he keep staring at him when he came here? Seeing that the Murlocs were about to rush under the wall, Kuina looked away and jumped off the wall. She ignored the Murloc rushing over, looked at the mouse again, and walked towards him unhurriedly. Sorata squatted on the fence quite bored, yawned, and tore off the wine gourd around his waist. Drink and watch a play. The two Murlocs who rushed over first looked at Kuina, and their hostility surged. One left and one right, one raised his fist and the other raised a knife, and hit Kuina hard on the head. At this time, there was a sound of, jung. When the Murloc on the left just punched out his fist, a knife light slashed across his throat first. Then Kuina's eyes flashed red, she turned her body slightly to the left, and took a step forward, avoiding another Murloc's knife. She paused on the spot, with a knife in her hand, holding the knife in her backhand, stabbing and retracting to the right. Then he ignored the two Murlocs, walked past them calmly, and continued to move forward. At this moment, the two Murlocs who were standing still, fell to the ground with a bang. Seeing the two compatriots twitching non-stop on the ground, the Murlocs behind them slammed on the brakes and froze in place. With just one face-to-face meeting, the two compatriots were simply killed. What? Then they were furious, their eyes were bloodshot instantly, and they rushed towards Kuina fiercely with a roar. But Kuina continued to walk towards the mouse unhurriedly, not being affected by the Murloc at all. He turned his right hand and held the knife in his forehand. A cold and dazzling light flashed on the knife. The blade pointed at the charging Murloc and made a simple horizontal cut. The light of the knife flashed, and the body of the Murloc who was rushing forward stopped in place instantly. Puff! Kuina took a step to the right, avoiding the blood spurting from the Murloc's chest. She glanced indifferently at the Murloc behind her, flicked the knife to shake off the blood stains on the knife. A big one was scattered on the ground, and under the sunlight, it shone with a dazzling red light. Kuina's indifferent eyes stared at the Murloc behind him with pain all over his body. They completely forgot that the way they looked at humans was actually exactly the same as the way Kuina looked at them at this time. Only then did the fish know how to be afraid. They all stopped their forward bodies, stared at Kuina, their pupils constricted, and their bodies retreated involuntarily. This human is definitely not an ordinary human, but a powerful Shinigami. 3 swords. 3 compatriots. They couldn't even see the knife, only the light of the knife.